Jarvis, drop my needle.
Hello, this is the hardcore legend Mick Foley, and if you are interested in listening to idiots, you came to the right place. Have a nice day.
Woo! That's an attention getter.
He's a very strange young man.
He's an idiot.
What we're dealing with here is a complete lack of respect for the law.
Oh my God, he's an idiot.
You know, of course, that you're out of your jurisdiction.
Personally, I think you're an idiot.
But that's the evidence in the car.
I was going into Toshi Station to pick up some power converters.
Always like to keep my audience riveted.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, friends and fiends, and welcome to Free Range Idiocy, the podcast about everything, but mostly just the stuff we like. Hey, it's only been an eon and a half since we completed our 80s wrestling bracket, and since it's technically March as we're recording this, we're still in the March Madness theme, so win all around, right? Right? Mm-hmm. Right? Anyways, in this episode, we're diving into WWE's Attitude Era as well as the famed Monday Night Wars with WCW. So let's get episode 128 rolling with a big old stone cold hell yeah. I am your Uncle Todd, and with me, as always, is the man who was the originator of the Attitude Era when he attended a Monday Night Raw taping in Durham, New Hampshire, and talked to Jim Cornette backstage. He has been my partner in idiocy for over 2 decades and takes a rock bottom like nobody's business. I give you the man they call Tim.
Are you ready?
You know what? I watched the whatever the thousands. I almost slipped into Dusty Rhodes there. The 1,000th episode of
Hard Times.
Hard times around here, baby. Hard times. I watched the 1,000th episode of Raw when they brought out DX and all that, and then Imperium came out and everything, and they had Kurt Angle just straggling along. And I love the fact when Kurt, Triple H is like, are you? All right, never mind. Just cut it off short. Just let's move along. It's already shot.
Awesome.
That was
awesome.
Great. That was all I could think of there. But now, did I get that right? Were you in attendance in Durham that night?
I was. It was, I believe, 1997, the fall of, which should line up with Austin feuding with The Rock.
Well, that was when he tossed the belt, right?
When he tossed the belt off the General Sullivan Bridge in in Newington over the Piscataqua River.
Yeah, which is oddly enough, that bridge is still there mostly because I think they're just waiting for it to rot and fall down because I think there's so much lead and other just EPA Superfund site-worthy chemicals involved in that bridge. Apparently, the bridge was made out of pure depleted uranium or something. I don't know what it is, but they've yet to tear this thing down. And every time I drive by, I'm amazed that thing is still standing. It's just like rust holding hands. That's all it is, holding it up.
Here, I thought they kept it up as a monument to the beginning of the Austin Rock feuding of the late 90s, early 2000s. So.
They might, because honestly, they've put plaques up for less stuff.
Yeah.
Was that the IC belt? That he threw off?
That was the IC belt. Was the IC belt. They were feuding over that at the time. And I was actually second row. By the ring. Oh my gosh, we got some prime seats for that one.
And that's a tiny arena.
It is. Yes. What was it called? The Whittemore Center, right?
Whittemore Center. Yes, sir. That was the what was it? The was it the Taos rink at the Whittemore Center? Anyways, but yeah, the Whittemore Center.
But I just remember being that I was just over the moon how close we were because you could actually see how big these guys are live.
Oh yeah.
And we'll talk about him in a little bit. And dude, Ron Simmons was no lie. When he came through, I'm looking at him I would not want to be standing across the ring from him because he was a big dude. Just TV does not do him justice. And I was like, holy crap, this guy is gonna mess you up from one end of Tuesday to tomorrow.
You remember back in the day with Page 2, ESPN's Page 2,
yes,
and they had Jason Whitlock as one of the writers. And he talked, it was one of his columns. I can't remember exactly what it was really about, but he talked about the fact that if you were cornered in an alleyway, who would you want with you? And his guy was in his prime, Jim Brown.
Oh yeah.
Because who's going to mess with Jim Brown in his prime? And you see Jim Brown in his prime, and you're like, no one. Yep. For me, I would probably go with Ron Simmons, because Ron Simmons looks to be that guy like, no, these muscles ain't just for show. They for go. Ron in his prime, whip your ass real quick.
Yes.
And not think too much about it, it seems like, either.
No. And what was great is it was during the time where they were kind of sowing the seeds of dissension in the Nation of Domination, where, you know, The Rock was kind of shining more, and Simmons wasn't happy with kind of the leadership role he was like. They were cutting a promo, and it was one where Rock gets a little too mouthy, and Simmons kind of shoots him a look, and it was just so cool to see it live. You know, like there's just a difference when you're so close to the action and seeing them do that, as well as during the matches. What was really cool is you could hear them calling, you know, the sequence like of the match as they were doing it. Like there was one point. Oh, you
serious?
Yeah, like there was one point. It was Triple H and Shawn Michaels against, I think, Owen Hart, and I'm trying to think who the other one was. I don't think it was Mark Henry. It was someone else.
Already right now, that's a hell of a match.
Oh, absolutely. But there was a sequence where Triple H tags Michaels in, and you hear him yell drop toe, and he goes and Triple H throws him off the ropes, does the drop toe, and then Michaels like nails him with something. I mean, it was just so cool to see the mechanics playing out. I'm just like, this is like, I was geeked out that night. I was just like, this is so cool.
Yeah. I mean, that's a given.
And then Austin comes in, and dude, the freaking place was deafening when he came in.
Of course.
And we know that from watching TV, but to be there live and hear that glass crash and him come down was just like, that was so cool.
Yeah. Is there a more iconic? I mean, I guess there's equally iconic, but as far as like someone who when the first couple seconds hit, it was a guaranteed gigantic pop.
Oh, gosh,
consistently.
Yeah.
Like I would almost say it's to the point now where it's like because you have those really strong pops, but then you also in wrestling you have kind of the pops. Like I would say Roman Reigns right now is the king of the, and Seth Rollins would be kind of probably second place, and Sami Zayn would be second place of that. Even when they're the heel, they're getting a gigantic pop just because of who they are or their music.
Yeah.
And then once the kind of the thing gets in motion, then they get the heat. But even it doesn't matter what. It's just like, it's this weird sort of middle ground of like, oh my gosh, it's that person, and this is why I bought the ticket and all that. And then they open their mouth like, boo.
Yeah.
But Austin was always just like, you know, immediate like Road Warrior plus 10, you know, pop.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It was insane. It was just insane. So yeah, sir. That was a great callback to the Durham, New Hampshire Monday Night Raw that I was able to witness. Getting out of there was hell because, you know, the Whittemore Center has one way in and one way out. So
well, no, it's the Whittemore Center itself, if I remember right, has about 4 different exits. There's one at each corner.
Sorry,
however,
the parking.
The parking lot is the hellscape.
That's what I meant. I literally sat there for probably 45 minutes just, you know, hanging because I'm just like, I'm not going anywhere. So
dude, I'm an A-lot till I die, ride or die A-lot Parker from, you know, back when I was in college, and I was always there so early. I had like one of the first spots in there. But I can't imagine getting out of there for a football game or anything else. Just, you know what? I'm going to walk down the street to whatever bar happens to be open. I'm going to go down there and wait for the parking lot to clear. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Now, actually, a follow-up question on this. Who was it that you knew, I know it wasn't you, who was backstage and did meet Jim Cornette, and Cornette was asking him where there was a Domino's pizza?
Yeah, so was not backstage.
By the way, folks, we will get to our topic at hand, but we're living glory days right now. So
this was not me. It was a friend of mine who I guess I'll keep nameless to protect the innocent.
What happened that you have to keep him nameless?
I don't know.
Good Lord, Did he knock someone out like with a shoot?
Well, I don't know if he wants to have his name mentioned on our podcast.
Oh, okay. All right. Wow.
But,
I mean, are we that low class?
No. So he was doing hospitality studies, I believe, at the time, and he was working. And there may still be a hotel at UNH where he was working, and that is where some of the talent was staying.
Okay. Oh,
and
they
so
stayed there,
apparently, and the way he told the story was just like hysterical, because this just sounds like such a Jim Cornette thing. But he's working behind the desk. All of a sudden, this guy comes in and he's like, just standard Jim Cornette, son, how do I get a Domino's pizza rung up here? He was like right to business.
And a Sprite, and a 2-liter of Sprite. Actually, probably like 2 liters of Sprite, because he probably was like, I got to figure out these matches tomorrow night.
Yes. So my friend's name was Mike. I'll say that much. But yeah, he worked at this hotel, and he did have an opportunity to interact with Jim Cornette. I don't recall if he interacted with any other talent, but I do believe there was some staff and some folks there who did have accommodations there that evening. So
very nice. I remember Mike. Now that you mentioned, I was down between a couple of guys. I knew it wasn't Matt. I didn't think it was Parker.
No.
But I was like, outside chance.
Like we all went to that show.
I'm sure.
Of us. But yes. Yes.
And that was before we were good enough friends where I would have gotten an invite, which is forever kind of now taunts me, because I'm like, oh my gosh, that would have been so cool.
That would have been so cool. We did make posters.
Of course you did, because that was a thing.
That was a big thing. Yeah. So yeah. So
memories,
absolutely,
all alone. Okay, that's about all I'm going to do with that. All right, folks, we are actually going to talk about the subject at hand. We are still in March Madness as of tonight, I believe, because I don't follow this crap. I gave up on my trying to pick brackets in either men's or women's basketball brackets, because I suck at it. I do. I am horrific at it, mostly because I don't follow it. So we are still within March Madness, so we're going to try and finish this thing out. We had a couple weeks off here because of some travel and family stuff and all. Well, not that bad family stuff, but just you got to take care of the fam. You got to spend time with your family. Exactly. As we know from Don Corleone, a man who doesn't spend time with his family can never truly be a man.
Michael.
And Michael,
bring the family comes first.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Hey,
Santino, stop fighting over there.
Yeah. Oh my God. And that's another rabbit hole that will go down. This is what happened.
Tracy Morgan had the best bit. Sorry, real quick. When he was on Jimmy Fallon's show after, it was like his first appearance after his accident, and he was just doing a whole funny bit of what he did when he was recovering from that accident, and he's just like, I watched a lot of movies. I watched The Godfather, and he's like, and he basically said, I have a theory. Santino would have lived had they had iPass or Easy Pass or whatever it's called.
Yes. True. That's truth
yes,
right
Tracy,
there.
You are correct, sir.
You know what? He's figured this whole thing out. Somebody call Coppola. We need to revisit Godfather 1. What if Easy Pass had been a thing?
But there's Easy Pass now. Santino lives.
It's the Godfather Marvel Universe crossover we didn't know that we needed, that now we need.
Yes, absolutely.
I desperately need that to be like an extra on on the new season of Marvel's What If.
Yes.
That would be awesome. But we will get to our topic at hand. But first, before we get to that, we have a little thing called The Week in Geek.
The Week in Geek.
Feels so funky.
What do we have this week?
Well,
Tim.
Last episode, sir, we spent some time visiting with the franchise known as Picard and discussing all things good and wonderful from that show. We're going to pivot now and do something similar, but with a different sci-fi franchise from the Star Wars universe, The Mandalorian. Woo! Oh, I can't do that theme music.
Nobody can. It's not actually instruments. It's like a shoebox with a string across it.
Yeah, basically. But yeah, we're 4 episodes in. I believe we're halfway through season 3.
Just about, because I think, isn't it a 9? No, it's an 8, isn't it?
It's 8, so we are halfway through, sir.
Dang,
we're already halfway through.
I'm getting Picard and Mandalorian. You know what? It almost feels like in some way I would be very happy if we standardized what a season of a streaming show is, but it ain't going to happen. And it's mostly just for my convenience for the show.
Here's what I'm curious about. We're halfway through and no sign of Christopher Lloyd yet.
I know. I hadn't thought about that until just when we started talking, because I know how much of a Christopher Lloyd stan you are. And I'm like,
Marty,
where's Reverend Jim? It's like, slow down.
I was half expecting him to be in the caves of Mandalore, but
that would have made a lot of sense. Actually, you know what? He's voicing the Mythosaur. That's what he's doing. He's going to show up.
Mythosaur opens his mouth. 1.21 gigawatts.
It's going to be episode 7 or 8, and he's going to, the Mandalore open its mouth, and it's going to be Christopher Lloyd. And you know what? And that's like the Pete's Dragon crossover that we didn't know that we needed. Again, we're just providing these things.
Right off the bat,
it's kind of odd. Like, we haven't seen that.
Yeah.
But we've got a ton of other stuff.
But we've seen something that is, well, we've seen a couple things that are very intriguing, which I want to get to.
We'll get to them, sir. Ain't no time like today.
Absolutely. Well, first off the bat, I just want to say I'm very thankful this season wasn't all about him going to bathe in the waters. I'm glad we got that locked down in episode 2.
Although
move
that
this
was
forward.
That was a great episode because we got some quality Bo-Katan Grogu time, which was great because it almost was like it turned into like a Lassie episode at one point because it was literally like, what happened to Din Djarin? Oh, he fell in the well? It's like a big spider-looking mechanical thing got him. It's like, how is this happening? But it was freaking-tastic.
I mean, one thing I wish they were a little bit clearer on, and I think it's been clarified in some articles, is I don't know if it was Filoni or Favreau basically said this, is that there have been a few years that have gone by since season 2. So that would explain in the first episode, The Apostate, when Din Djarin goes and visits Greef Karga, that we see Navarro radically different from when we saw it in season 1, where it was much more run down and poverty stricken. Now it is this vibrant, kind of growing area, and that kind of threw me a little bit because I'm like, what the heck happened? But then when I saw it, it's like, oh, okay, a couple of years have gone by. It's like, okay, well, could would it have killed him to just put that in somewhere? Just let us know.
Thing. Like, here's where I think that, quite honestly, and I say this, I am not trying to be sarcastic here for once. Once. But I think your sharp observational eye on these things can sometimes work to your disadvantage because I just bought into it and I didn't think too much about it. I just was like, and now I'm realizing subconsciously, I was like, oh yeah, time has passed. And and I think that, for someone like me, that just sort of works. Because again, I like to lose myself in the thing. I just want to be immersed in it.
Right.
That's all I'm asking for. And I think that, whether it's because of your kind of, predisposition for analyzing things like that, you have a very sharp critical eye when it comes to these things. And so you pick that out. Me, I was just sort of like, oh, okay. Whatever, and I just and now I'm
doing well, and he's got robots carrying his robe.
Oh my gosh, that was freaking fantastic! He's got carrying the 2 little droids that are carrying the end of his robe. I'm like, dude, just get that better tailored. How about that? But, oh wait, but it's Apollo Creed. He can do what he wants.
I feel like there should have been some music being played as he was walking too.
Oh, always. I mean, Greef ought to always have theme music. I mean, come on now. But no, that was I get where you're coming from, and I do agree.
Yeah.
I think that might have helped a portion of the audience deal with that. I feel there's enough people like me though who are just like, oh, okay, and you just kind of buy it because that is the thing. With the Mandalorian now, that unfortunately, stuff like Obi-Wan Kenobi, what else am I thinking about? There's some other like Star Wars projects that just haven't had that immediate buy-in. Whereas Mando has done so well. Like the first season, damn. I mean, you tell me. Like I'm going to tell you right now. Battlestar Galactica season 1, Watchmen, Mando season 1.
Yeah.
3 of the best things I've ever seen that now qualify, and I'm putting up my air quotes, television, best television that I've seen.
Mando, I mean, season 1, episode 3 scratches my itch, baby.
Dude, I mean, just the entire season. The entire.
I 100% agree, but that episode is like that episode represents everything and I've said this before in prior episodes. Everything I ever wanted to see in a Boba Fett or Mandalorian based sort of storytelling. That was phenomenal. So
remind me what that was again.
You're right on.
Remind me what that was again. Episode 3.
So that's the one where he goes and busts out the Grogu from.
Yes,
but does it with all of his bounty hunter.
Yeah,
tactics and stuff like that, and I'm just like that was such a geek out moment for me. Like this is everything I wanted to see from a Boba Fett franchise kind of thing. Is him in action doing stuff like this, and it was cool to see it through the eyes of a different character. So
and Book of Boba Fett is another one where it's like I bought it, but also now looking back at it, I bought it because the second half of it involved Mando.
Yeah. Yep.
And not to throw a ton of shade at that, like the first half of Book of Boba Fett was still really good, but man, has any Star Wars property done better? Just establishing itself as like, here it is, here is the and you believe it. Yeah. I don't know that anyone has done a better job, which is to me why I'm like, give Favreau and Filoni whatever they want, like literally, like. What was it? The here's a throwback for you. If you remember back in the day, back in the 90s when they did the Hoffa movie, and it was Jack Nicholson as Jimmy Hoffa, and then Danny DeVito was like the driver, like friend, and he had the business card that Jimmy Hoffa had written, give this man whatever he wants. And he would show that, and it would be like instant, like, okay. And it was like a key to anywhere he wanted. It was his golden ticket. That is basically what I'm saying for like Favreau and Filoni is like, give them whatever they want. What have they done wrong, really? Yet, I guess, because it is a very what have you done for me lately world. Yeah. But no, I'm totally on board, dude. No, you're totally right. So, anyways, continuing with the first half of Mando season 3 here, because we sidetracked ourselves really like 3 or 4 times now. It's great.
I blame the bourbon. All right. So first 2 episodes are really kind of the arc of him,
way to pull back the curtain, sir. Way to pull back the curtain. Thank you.
Well, why not? Atoning for his sins of taking his helmet off. And so we get to see Grief Karga. We get to see what's going on with him. Try to bring back IG-11. That goes radically badly.
Yeah. Which I'm grateful that they kind of went that direction.
I thought he was destroyed. So I was kind of surprised, like there was anything to really recover there. But
it was kind of morbid. All of a sudden, we're like, oh yeah, he's that statue out front. I'm like, dang, that's kind of even for a droid. That's kind of cold, isn't it? Like, we just propped him up in this town square. Like, yay.
Yeah.
Oh, and is that a is that a sculpture? No, that's actually him. Like, kind of changes it would be one thing like, oh, that's a statue of Ulysses S. Grant. Is it a statue? No, that's actually his body. We stuffed it and then we coated it in bronze. Ew.
Yeah.
It changes your perspective on the thing.
It does. And I almost forgot to mention in this episode, I do believe this is where they're going through hyperspace, I believe. And we see some creatures floating through hyperspace, I believe.
Yes, the space whales. Oh my gosh, my daughter freaked out at that. She totally geeked out at that. And if I'm being honest, I did too, because I was like, oh, we're that much closer to Ezra Bridger and Grand Admiral Thrawn.
I was just gonna say that's why I was geeking out. I'm like, okay, if we see those things, then that means someone else is on his way.
Yeah, you know what the funny thing is though, I saw all of that and I shifted franchises in a moment, and I heard Scotty like, "There be whales here, Cotton."
Yes. That's awesome. That's awesome. But yeah, so we see a little bit of that in the first episode as he gets ready to go to Mandalore. In episode 2, we see him visit Pelimoto to see if he can get a chip he needs for IG-11. Can't, so he gets an R5 unit. They head over to Mandalore, find out that it is not as toxic as they thought it was, and so he's able to go spelunking, basically.
Yeah.
And ends up fighting some sort of crazy, like it was almost like kind of a General Grievous type character.
Yeah, but before that, remember,
strange.
He goes to see Bo-Katan, and she's like lounging on her throne, which I saw.
That was weird. Did you not find that weird?
I did, and someone posted on TikTok, and which of course, because I'm old, I'm not on the TikTok, so I saw it on Instagram like a couple days later, because that's just the way it goes. Like whatever's on TikTok winds up on Instagram, and now that TikTok is, I don't know what the heck is going on with TikTok. I don't care. Not to say I'm against anyone who's on TikTok. I just don't care because I'm not. But like this whole thing of like, Bo-Katan is like hanging out, like playing video games or something, and they're like, oh, the Mandalorian's here. I was like, oh crap, and like running through like their whole like house and stuff to get like to the throne. Is like, okay, should I sit like this? Should I sit? Oh no, I should sit like. Should I sit? And like trying to, this thing isn't very comfortable. And like, okay, I'm gonna sit here like, oh, Din Djarin. It was such an odd pose, and I saw that and I'm like, that kind of feels like it would be correct,
Yes. Yeah.
But and of course, she's like, everyone's gone away and all that, and then he goes down to Mandalore and does battle with the Grievous bot, which still we don't know what the crap that was, but damn, was it kind of like badass or not? I mean, sheesh.
That was. But yeah, like you said, it's kind of that Lassie moment where Grogu gets away, flies back to wherever Bo-Katan is, and then she comes and
oh yeah, she's like, I'm going to deal with
this
this one way or another, and then all of a sudden Grogu pops up and she's like,
yep.
What's that, Lassie? What's that, Grogu?
Yeah.
Din Djarin fell down a well? All right, let's go.
Let's go get him.
Oh my gosh.
But the best part is at the end when he does go to immerse himself in the water and seemingly forgets that when he's wearing all that Beskar, it's going to basically drag him to the bottom of whatever body of water that is. So
no, but the thing is, like, because of all the bombing, there is this. It's opened up this crevasse, and so it used to be like it was a wading pool, and now you go to the deep end, and so he just like and which one of my favorite moments of like Bo-Katan diving under and using her jetpack. And my daughter turns to me and she's like, jetpacks work underwater? I'm like, I guess so. I never thought of it before. But in the Star Wars universe, everything makes sense. It's all space magic.
Indeed.
But I was telling the man they call Tim this before in our pre-production meeting, when Bo-Katan finally, retrieves, the Mando's, passed out corpse because he didn't apparently seal up his helmet before he did the big plunge, and is bringing him up and sees the mythosaur, and you hear that and like the bubbles come up and stuff. In my head canon, that she is saying, what the frack?
Yeah.
You can't talk me out of that.
Yeah.
That is that's what's happening right there.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, so good. So
100%.
Good. And then like the arc that now Bo-Katan is on for the next 2 episodes.
Mm-hmm.
Holy crap, like what a fracking journey this thing is, where all of a sudden it's like, oh, did you bathe in the living waters? And here's the living waters, and the living waters do this weird thing where it's like, and it's like, oh, okay, so you did it, and you done did it because we saw the water and it did this thing, and it's like, you're now not excommunicated, you're part of the thing again. And Bo-Katan, by the way, you're part of the thing too, because you were in the waters. You're like, I don't follow the way. I'm like, the whole thing, like all of this, as I'm watching it, I'm like, say what? So now, but okay. It's like one of those things where I did not expect that left turn, and yet I kind of was craving it,
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, so good.
Yeah, the moment where she sees the mythosaur, that opens up a whole can of worms now, because that's, part of, past legend. But if there's one alive now, that could be a galvanizing, moment, whether it's her or Din Djarin who ends up riding it, because that that's a major thing, is the Mandalorian who rides the mythosaur, will lead the larger group. And so the fact that they're factoring that into it, is fantastic. So we got Purgles in episode 1. We have a mythosaur in episode 2.
Well, but now keep in mind, like, this might be so this is the thing. Like, if you take this into wrestling booking terms, like, this might be their way of having to avoid like a one-on-one fight, because like, oh well, maybe she'll ride the mythosaur and then she can lead the people, and then she doesn't need the darksaber, or maybe he can just hand over the darksaber. Right. And then she can have both the things, because she doesn't necessarily need it. Like, riding the mythosaur is enough, but hey, if I have the darksaber, now I've really got him.
Well, and now she's getting a taste of her own medicine, because she's seen something, and now she's trying to talk to them about it, and the armor just kind of blew her off in episode 4. She's like, yeah, whatever.
Well, not necessarily. Like, I think it's just the thing is, like, I get.
Really say anything though. I mean, she just kind of was like, okay.
But that's the thing is, like, the armorer, you have to understand, like, this sect, let's call it that for lack of a better word at this point, this sect of Mandalorians, very hardcore, very much like, you don't take off your helmet and all that, and apparently that wasn't a thing for every Mandalorian. It was this, children of the watch sort of thing. So they're hardcore. And for them, like, oh, you'll see many things. So for someone to say, like, I saw a mythosaur, it's like, okay, it's just a normal thing. Like, because, hey, weird stuff happens because they believe that these things will happen. And it could be just like any kind of religious sect on our planet. Like, oh, and I saw this person, be healed of their leprosy or their epilepsy or whatever. And you're just like, oh, okay. You're like, well, is that a big deal? Well, no, because I follow this particular set of beliefs, so therefore it's commonplace. It is written, and therefore it shall be. Yeah. So I mean, I'm not trying to totally play off your thing, but I'm just trying to offer another opinion of why she might have been a bit more nonchalant than you would suppose, where she'd be like, you saw a fracking what? Say again, please.
I just figured, since he came back with the living water, why would she not be a little more, kind of like, oh, well, maybe we should follow up on this sort of thing. Well, because I think that, because she passes it off as a vision, which I understand. But to me, what I don't understand is there's a bit of sincerity in what Bo-Katan is trying to communicate to her, where I just feel like, in a way, she gets blown off, rather than why doesn't the armorer say to her, okay, well, similar to what she said to Mando about, go bathe yourself to redeem yourself. Okay, if you think you saw a mythosaur, go find the mythosaur and bring him back, or whatever. I mean, it's just like why isn't she a little more, I guess, believing in it, rather than trying to write it off as it being like a vision? You know what I mean? Like that to me is what's kind of interesting, is being this sect that is very about, much about their creed and a way of living, and this being part of their legend. Why wouldn't, well, I know why she wouldn't, because they probably believe there isn't a mythosaur, and so she's probably thinking whatever Bo-Katan saw was just not really what she thought it was. But I don't know. It just feels like something that I would think they would want to drill into a little bit, and they didn't. So
if you go back to that episode, so Bo is reading the plaque again, because the plaque that you put up a plaque for everything, and George Washington slept here for 5 minutes. He took a nap.
Yes.
But and she reads it with a very sarcastic sort of tone, like, yeah, I've read it before. This is the thing. Like, yeah, George Washington slept here. Hey, there's a mythosaur, and use the mythical source of the mythosaur, and then he starts going into the whole like very devout recitation of this thing that he's supposed to do, and you even through the helmet, And this is the thing that I think that doesn't get enough credit, and I'll go for, and again, I've already well established I'm deep in the bag for Katie Sackhoff as an actor, but Pedro Pascal as well. And then I would even go further to a movie outside of this, V for Vendetta, where Hugo Weaving managed to convey so much without having the benefit of facial expressions. And if you want to go to wrestling, you can even go to Kane, who managed to express himself physically without the benefit of being able to read his facial expression. She kind of gives this look of like, are you fracking kidding me? Like, really? Okay, you buy into that? Oh, isn't that cute? And then all of a sudden he just disappears and she's like, oh crap.
Yeah.
What is this? And she even says afterwards, like, it didn't used to be this way. Like, it must have opened a fissure or something from the bombing and all this. So if you're looking for like what the armor is going on, like she's going on the information of like, yeah, this used to be the home of the mythosaur. And it wasn't like, the living waters extended down like 500 feet. It was, it was a wading pool. You went in, you waded in, you had to duck down like, and I'm, I've bathed in the living waters, and I had to duck down in order to do it, to get all of me under. And instead, it's like all of a sudden now it's like you have to go 100 fracking feet down. And oh, by the way, there's a mythosaur that's been hibernating under there that now is like, and you are?
Yeah.
Because that look that the mythosaur gave was the same look that my cat gives me when I wake her up unexpectedly.
Stink eye.
Like, and who the hell do you think you are?
Yeah.
That's my only retort to that, as I think that there is, she isn't aware of the fact that things have changed like geographically on Mandalore.
All right.
Good God, we went deep on that.
And we need to go deep on one more thing, which is on episode 3. So I'm going to line this up for you. And we talked about this last week, because you and I are geeking out about over the last couple episodes how there are potentially some callbacks to Battlestar a little bit, with Starbuck and everything. In episode 4, we heard Bo-Katan talk about going after a raptor, which was kind of funny. And then Uncle Todd in our pre-production meeting was like, I was waiting for her to say, I want a raptor assault team, and that would have been appropriate given what they were doing.
If only we could have gotten Eddie Olmos to voice one of the Mandalorians. Like literally, he would have had to. He could have done it from home. Like literally, someone could have come in and I'm telling you, right?
Beauty of the Mandalorians, right? They're all wearing helmets, so he could do it, right?
Oh yeah, I'm telling you right now, folks. As I'm broadcasting, as I'm recording from home, it's not a big setup. It is essentially like just a microphone on a stand, and all you need is like 3-4 lines out of Eddie. And you know what? He would have been tickled 8 shades of pink to do that for Katie. He would have done that pro bono for like I'll tell you what, just buy me a nice bottle of wine at some point, whatever, from Favreau. Like, oh wait, it's Favreau? Okay, buy me a really good bottle of wine then.
Yeah.
Like, come on, couldn't we get a Raptor assault team quote, like some sort of thing, and then they could have been like, quiet down, you.
Yeah.
Just that would have been great. But oh my gosh, so good.
But in episode 3, well, how do I put this? Oh, okay, so the beginning part is interesting because, but before we get the Mandalorian title, kind of sequence there, is we catch up with Bo-Katan and Din Djarin returning, to her home base, where she lounges around on the throne.
Yeah, well, as you do.
Interestingly enough, they get attacked by some TIE interceptors.
Well, wait a minute. Now, was it TIE? Oh, okay, it is TIE intercept. I'm thinking the Defenders.
They are TIE interceptors. So they're getting attacked by TIE interceptors, and so they employ this whole strategy to kind of get them knocked down. So here's what exactly plays out. So they're dealing with the TIE interceptors. Once they're done dealing with the TIE interceptors, there's a sequence of TIE bombers that are now bombing the very castle that Bo-Katan resides in, so that it is basically destroyed at this point. So they go after them. And then as they're going after the TIE bombers, there's an entire squadron of TIE fighters that show up that grossly outnumber them to a degree that, Djarin and her get out of Dodge quickly. Sir, Does that sequence of strategy remind you of anyone in particular?
What do you hear, Starbuck?
Indirection after indirection after indirection.
What do you hear, Starbuck? Oh my gosh! If there was ever a moment to like just yes. But the thing is, like, that character, and we're having fun here, folks. But to get down to like brass tacks, those types of characters carry on throughout fiction and various, into wrestling, into movies, TV, books, whatever. You need those characters who are just willing to just like, I don't care if there's 100 of them and one of me. I'll talk about it in my and another thing. John Wick is another one that just I don't care how many of them there are. Antonio Banderas in one of my favorite flicks of all time. Oh my gosh, what I say it's one of my favorite flicks, and now I'm blanking on. Once Upon a Time in Mexico, where Danny Trejo is talking about how he's this and that and the other, and Antonio Banderas delivers the line that only Antonio Banderas can deliver, and have it have any gravitas where you don't laugh, where he's like, well, I guess I'm just going to have to kill you all, and just and then he kills them all, and it's like, oh my gosh. You need those characters, and Bo-Katan is one of those characters where it's she walks that line that Starbuck did of being kind of somewhere between a zealot and a loose cannon.
Right. And so you're jumping to the sequence where we get a little bit of a nod to Starbuck there, right?
But even like going up against the inconceivable odds and still wanting to press it, that is totally a Starbuck moment.
Right, but I'm talking about the puppet master behind who is, because there's a question of where are these TIE fighters coming from, and that's what I'm trying to get at is who have we seen in the past who will go and do one thing, then do another thing, and then do another thing, and it's all part of the sequence and strategy that's going on. Who does that remind you of?
Well, I don't know. Perhaps it's a certain Grand Admiral?
I believe so, sir. Like when I saw that sequence play out,
so in for this.
Like when I saw that sequence play out, like after the bombers, when you start to see like the flood of TIE fighters, and I'm sitting here watching this with my wife, like, what the crap.
If
like that was literally
defenders,
the realization I had. Like I just read a book, or 3 books actually, that outline pretty much how this guy operates, and this is like right in the wheelhouse of it. So so I thought that was just brilliantly done. And it was funny, I was talking to my nephew about it because he had just seen it. And I'm like, you know what that means, that whole like battle in the beginning. And he he knows that I'm a big Thrawn fan. He's like, Grand Admiral Thrawn. I'm like, you're right. You're right, sir.
And meanwhile, he's just like humoring the old guy.
Yeah, basically,
which is fine.
But to
respect
your
your elders.
There was a phenomenal sequence in there where there's one TIE interceptor left, and basically Bo-Katan flips the ship around a la Starbuck.
Yeah.
Right? And shoots it down. And I'm like, I texted Uncle Todd this. I said, you cannot tell me that was not a nod to Starbuck and BSG. That was such a Raptor maneuver that she did right there. That was phenomenal.
No, that is one of those things that BSG changed the way that people think about, just the way that Star Wars changed the way that people thought about dogfights in space, because George Lucas essentially used like the way that now effects houses and directors use pre-visualization to be like, okay, and this is kind of what I'm thinking. George Lucas did that with like shots of dogfights, and I can't remember if he actually used like actual gun camera footage from World War II or not. If not, he used some very accurate films that were made about World War II dogfighting, and it's the same sort of thing. Like Battlestar Galactica then changed it, like, well, why do you only have to move in 2 dimensions? space is three-dimensional. There's no air resistance. There's no reason why you can't all of a sudden go at a 90-degree angle. There's no G's except for what the thrust is creating. There's no gravity acting upon you. So therefore, you can have like in the mini series of Battlestar Galactica, when all of the Vipers all of a sudden just go and they like spread in this way, and it's like, whoa, oh, this is a different freaking thing that I've ever seen. But to see that done in an atmosphere is also another thing. So I mean, there is that dynamic thing of like what BSG has done, and quite honestly, yeah, Mando owes to that, because they changed the game back in 2004 when they started doing that. I mean, come on, you have to. Of course, it's a nod, and it doesn't hurt that you've got one of the lead actors from that series playing one of your keystone roles in this series. Oh my gosh, it's almost too good, almost.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's never too good, but it's almost.
That was such a great sequence overall. And then the funny part is that's all we get of Mando and Bo-Katan for most of that episode, because it focuses on the Dr. Pershing character. And we get a little bit of a look into the New Republic and how they're offering an amnesty program and trying to rehabilitate former Imperials. And what a great
that poor son of a bitch. I mean,
yeah. Well, and so from Moff Gideon's crew, I think her name is Elia Kane.
Yeah.
We find her as one of the amnesty, candidates or individuals as part of that program. And once again, I think to myself, is this not in the Thrawn way of thinking of, throw someone in there who is pretending to be one thing, but is really about doing something else and kind of wreaking havoc and causing chaos. And so, I think, for I think when they showed the episode, or in the beginning of the episode, when they were doing the flashback showing her as part of Gideon's crew, I'm wondering if they're doing some indirection there, because as that episode plays out, we find out Moff Gideon escaped, so he's out there somewhere. So I'm sure the prevailing thought is Gideon is really the puppet master behind everything. I'm thinking that where this is all going is in this, similar to the season 2 finale, where we see, Luke Skywalker, who is part of this universe at this time. We are going to actually get our first viewing of Grand Admiral Thrawn. We're going to find out who the puppet master is behind all of this. And I'm kind of excited. I think 3 is a very underrated episode. I think it was great to totally take it off of Mando.
Oh no, it's great.
And just focus on that character, and see elements of the New Republic and how this, how Coruscant is functioning now that it's not under Imperial control, and that sort of thing. And so, I thought that was just a fantastic episode.
I'm one of those people who, and I've said it before, and it's kind of funny that we're talking about wrestling is the main topic. And by the way, if you're sticking around for the wrestling, we will get there. And if you're not, here's a reason to stick around, is that when we were talking about, the idea of getting pulled in, they had me in that episode, and I was there with Pershing, and when he got betrayed, it was similar to that moment of they had me when WWE did the Roman Reigns Sami Zayn thing. Damn it, you had me. Even though I'm smartened up to this, I know the whole thing. I've got the background information, blah 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 blah. I know how scripts work and blah blah. Damn it, you pulled me in. And that is the mark of really great just entertainment, is that you get sucked into it, and despite how much about how it's produced and all that. But yeah, that was fan freaking tastic how they managed to get you into that story. And it's hey, here's Mando, and now here's not Mando for most of the episode, and you're still invested.
Yeah.
So good. So I mean, and then they give you a callback to that moment when he touches the peak of the mountain on Coruscant that isn't, the last bit of Coruscant that you can see, the surface area. They give you a throwback to that in episode 4.
Yeah.
which I thought was great. I was like, oh, hey, that's a thing. Yep. I'm easy to amuse.
You are.
Yeah, you know what? It's a much happier life, quite honestly.
But I do like how, like you were saying, like with Bo-Katan, it is interesting how this is kind of morphed less into, it's less about Mando, and I'm thankful this season isn't all about his redemption. Like they got that out of the way by episode 2. It's now Bo-Katan and her journey. I'm excited to see where the next 4 go, because
totally.
There's no anyone who can try to predict how this is going to end for the season is smoking crack, because there's no way there's no way anyone can tell right now where this is going.
Well, it's the same people who can predict an NCAA bracket because they don't know anything. It's beginner's luck, that sort of thing. Like the fortune favors the foolish, sort of thing. Yeah. But otherwise, no one knows where this thing is going. And you know what? I'm totally fracking in for it.
Absolutely.
I'm outside the Star Wars. I'm outside the Star Wars universe because I've buckled my seatbelts.
Indeed. Well, after that long dissection of the first 4 episodes of Mandalorian season 3, that, my friends, is The Week in Geek.
Well, thank you, sir, for taking us on that journey, and now that you've done all that work, hey, how about you carry us through the rest of the episode too? Because you are the wrestling sommelier, as we will,
indeed, Sherpa, if you will.
Yes, that's actually a much better word, because you're carrying our asses to the top of the peak. So, sir, how about you give us the lowdown on exactly what's going on in pro wrestling in the 1990s?
Yes, sir. So, as we as we talked about last episode, the 80s was that initial golden era where wrestling went from really just regional promotions to one big global promotion, and then there was WCW, which was not quite global at that point, but it was a presence. And so in the 90s, we really kind of see, like, the early 90s is kind of a bit of a desert, if you will. A little bit of a downturn in the business, a little bit of downturn in terms of creativity of what they were doing. I mean, they were really kind of, once the Andre thing ran its course and they went through Savage and Ultimate Warrior, it was starting to get hard to figure out like what was going to happen next with Hogan. How is this, when do they transition and move on from Hogan, because he was getting, a bit older as an athlete. And so really, when you think about wrestling in the 90s and really hitting that kind of bottom, that lowest of lows, here are some fine examples of the creativity of Vincent Kennedy McMahon at that point. We had such fine characters as the Repo Man, as T.L. Hopper, who apparently came to the ring with a plunger.
Well, living the gimmick. And let's be honest, when you've got human beings that large, that might actually be the best idea to have for a gimmick, because somebody's stopping at the toilet. Bam Bam Bigelow overflowed so many toilets at venues. I mean, just look at him. Just look at him. That's a guy who didn't have enough fiber in his diet.
Indeed. And then, of course, where we have someone who can plunge after Bam Bam, we also have Duke Dumpster Drozy, who will take the trash out.
Gosh.
We had apparently a hockey player gone wrong in the Goon. We had Kane 0.5 in Isaac Yankem DDS. Glenn Jacobs at his finest, coming out as a psychotic dentist with really bad teeth, because, if the irony of the name wasn't enough, we had to have the bad teeth to just, pound it home.
Like a British bad teeth, like that level of bad teeth. Yes.
Friar Ferguson. There was actually a guy named Friar Ferguson, and then he was turned into Bastion Booger, which I'm just beside myself.
Who did he hurt? Who did he take off?
Who does he have pictures on? Because he had some kind of a short run there, so someone put him.
Well, the thing is, like, you thought Friar Ferguson was bad. They're like, oh, you thought that was bad. Here, let's put you in this outfit, which was like some sort of shiny silver S&M thing, but
it was basically like if someone just took duct tape and just taped over him. You know what I mean? Like that's
what it was.
Oh my gosh!
It was the woman from The Fifth Element. It was the bandage thing. That's what it was.
Yes. Yes.
But they looked nothing alike. Let's just put it that way. Don't Google it, folks. Don't Google it. You can't unsee that.
Mantar, who actually came down to the ring with a horse head.
Which, Jim Cornette, as a rib, got sent out with him once. I remember he told that story where they're just like, and at that point, I think Uncle Corny was just done with WWE, and he was just like, whatever, I'm getting paid, and he went out there, and so he's healing it up as a manager from Mantar, and got back, and that was the only time he was ever Mantar's manager.
Oh
but
my
he's
gosh!
like, I'm pretty sure it was a rib, or it might have just been a mistake.
Oh, it's funny. We had Max Moon, who was some sort of out of world sort of guy. I mean, he was just dressed in like all these kind of neon things, and it was very acrobatic.
Was that a shoot off from the Moondogs?
Not even close. He actually looked closer to Farouk's outfit, if you can believe it.
Oh goodness.
And that was Farouk as the Roman gladiator, not Farouk as in the APA, or
the nation even
enforcer. Yes. We had the Berserker, who was this guy who came down to the ring holding his palm up and just saying "Huss, Huss," and that's all he did. He just came to the ring and just was like, this kind of like wound up, I'm just going to beat the tar out of you and then leave the ring sort of thing. It was kind of crazy. We had Nails, the demented inmate who tortured poor Big Boss Man. Because if you're going to have a cop, you got to have the guy he put away and who is seeking revenge. So
it is a natural, but oh my gosh, that's one of the ones where you're like, okay, this at least makes sense. And then you see the execution of it, you're like, oh dear God, where's the guy with the plunger?
Yeah. And then we had Damien Demento, who I'm not even entirely sure what was up with that gimmick.
I don't think he did either.
I don't think he did either. And then last but not least, a special mention.
Oh man, this
Fred, guy. I think his name was Fred Ottoman, right? Ottoman? Fred Otto, maybe was his name. I forget.
I don't know.
But he comes out on WCW. He was known as Typhoon or Tugboat in WWE. Comes out in WCW for his debut. Was supposed to be in a big program with Sid Vicious, Davey Boy Smith, and I'm trying to and Sting, and comes out in a glittery stormtrooper helmet. With just and the stumbles over
with the Sonny Bono like fur vest too. Yes. Don't forget that. Like it was just like whatever was hanging around backstage. They're like, put it on him, send him out.
Basically, imagine if an Imperial ship crash landed on Earth during the time of cavemen. This is what would happen when one of those cavemen, ripped the stormtrooper apart and put his helmet on. That's what Shockmaster looked like.
I picture it more as a stormtrooper who crashed into Studio 54. Then after they got off Then after they got off their 12th Coke bender, they started putting on some weight, and then after they ate their way through New York City, they found their way down south and were in a wrestling promotion. They stole somebody's like XXXXXXL fur vest.
Yes.
And we're like, I'm a wrestler now. Okay,
yes, that's right.
Whatever. Go on out. Oh, that was the most embarrassing debut of all time. Trips over, supposed to break through a wall, trips over the bottom of the wall, the helmet goes off.
Yep. Helmet goes off, pulls himself up, puts the helmet on, and then I think it was like Kevin Sullivan who was doing the voice, because it was one of those like creepy like kidnapper disguised voice sort of things. And oh my gosh, yeah. So good old Shockmaster. Check it out on YouTube. Plenty of versions of it out there, so you can just see how a wrestling debut can go so wrong. But that was the lowest of lows. And the 90s was a very complicated, or I shouldn't say complicated, but well, it was complicated, but in wrestling in the 90s. Lowest of lows, but then we get to the highest of highs, and we have this sort of like second golden era that starts with the Monday Night Wars, the NWO, WCW rising to prominence, really giving WWE a real run for their money in terms of competition. You read interviews or you see some of these biography shows, and I figure it was The Undertaker or Austin, but I remember one of them mentioned that, they really felt like they were just only, Vince was only a couple of weeks away from having to shutter the company because the company was just getting so obliterated by WCW. And so, from that, they got scrappy. They changed up what they were doing. They got rid of the TL Hoppers and the Goons, and they entered into the Attitude Era. And really, from that, we really saw, and this was during a time when Uncle Todd and I were in college. We were apartment roommates.
Oh, perfectly timed for the Attitude Era. Oh,
absolutely.
My gosh.
And the thing was, Monday night, wrestling, whether it was WCW or WWE, was must-see TV. It was really, really compelling stuff. I mean, it was goofy, but I mean, the storylines they had going on, the stuff that was going on with Austin and Foley and Rock and Triple H and Undertaker, I mean, it was really just compelling stuff, and you wanted to see what was going to happen every week. And so it was just a real golden era of wrestling, kind of a second era that way. And so the bracket we're going to reflect on here and adjudicate on is reflective of the the talent of that time. And in the 80s, we kept it to 16. We tried to do 16 for the 90s and realized there are just so many, folks from WCW and from WWE that we really wanted to, address and go through and talk about that we had to add a play-in bracket. So instead of 16, we have about 21 or 22 wrestlers that we're going to go through here.
And even with that, there's like a very large left out in the cold paragraph that the man they call Tim is going to get to here. That is unbelievable.
Yes. So the names we're going to run through tonight are going to be, or during this episode, is going to be Hollywood Hulk Hogan, Kevin Nash, also known as Diesel, Scott Hall, also known as Razor Ramon, Goldberg, Diamond Dallas Page, Bret the Hitman Hart, HBK Shawn Michaels, Ric Flair, Ron Simmons, Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, Triple H, Sting, The Undertaker, Mick Foley, Yokozuna, Big Van Vader, Chyna, Chris Jericho, Macho Man Randy Savage, oh yeah, and last but not least, Isaac Yankem 1.0, Kane.
Well, don't forget about the faux Diesel.
And the faux Diesel. Yeah, that's a very good point. He did play faux Diesel.
Poor Glenn, man. And then back in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, he was Unabomb. And he was the Christmas creature. I just watched the Kane biography. You can tell.
He seemed to not have a good string of luck with those gimmicks, did he?
No. I mean, if anybody was karmically due for having a character that stuck, Glenn Jacobs is right at the front of the line.
Yeah.
After going through all those, like, that man was due. Sort of like Kevin Sullivan after playing the Great and Mighty Oz and Vinny Vegas, like, he was due. He was due.
And maybe it's reflective of just how impactful and just how vast the personalities were in the 90s as compared to the 80s. And again, not to say the 80s didn't, we probably could have come up with a 32-man bracket with the 80s, when you factor in, a lot of other talent from NWA and WWE. But what I think made the 90s a little bit harder was there was, with the advent of the internet and with, just the ability of the talent to be able to really, get their characters over, and the fact that there were really 3 promotions at the time, if you count ECW, that we really had to cut. We couldn't pull more people in, because otherwise we'd really have like a 64-man bracket. It'd be crazy.
Yeah.
So as far as names that we had to leave out in the cold, and we will bear some shame on this. We did not feel good about doing this, but we had to. No. We had to kind of draw a line somewhere.
And the line is drawn at what we know.
And the line is drawn at what we know. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So, unfortunately, we will not be discussing anyone from ECW, but we have been talking about maybe we just need to have an ECW bracket to really just, talk about who was really the cream of the crop from that time period and from that promotion. As well as you'll hear, some tag teams as well. And Uncle Todd had the fine idea of we should run a tag team bracket at some point. So So from left out in the cold, ECW stars, so like Taz, Raven, Tommy Dreamer, Sandman, Rob Van Dam, unfortunately, did not go above the line here. I have it as the Kurtz, Kurt Hennig and Kurt Angle. Kurt Hennig was a hard one because that was kind of the apex of his career when he was in WWE with Bret the Hitman Hart. But from an Impact standpoint, it's questionable. So we just kind of, dropped him below the line. Kurt Angle was just starting his career at the end of the 90s. So we'll talk more about him in the 2000s. Jake the Snake Roberts, he had about a year run in the 90s, was very instrumental, as we talked about last episode, and kind of kicking off the Attitude Era with being that foil against Austin and Austin kind of establishing himself as Stone Cold. But it kind of stops there. And so the Dudleys, Edge and Christian, the Hardy Boys, all great tag teams. TLC was in 1999, the first match. But again, can't really get into it here for the 90s and just given, just all the folks that we need to go through here. So Sid Vicious, Lex Luger, Tatanka, Goldust hurts because he had a phenomenal brawl. I mean, first, the character was so kind of ahead of its time and so different.
Yeah. So unlike anything else.
Yeah.
And Dustin Runnels just seemed like he was up for whatever.
Yeah. And so with Goldust, and then there's the memorable brawl with Roddy Piper, which really felt like a brawl because there was a couple points when I remember, and, I'm assuming this was a gentleman's agreement, but Piper really just hauled off and punched him. I mean, I just remember he took a punch and because they had been wrestling for a bit, it was a little bit of, for some reason, the area, the lot that they were wrestling or brawling in was like soaking wet. I don't know, like once they left there was no like water anywhere. So I don't know if someone hosed it down beforehand or what, but
I think because they were trying to make it more cinematic.
Yeah. Okay. So, but there was a point when Piper punched him and you just see it was almost like the Apollo Creed Drago fight when Drago punches Apollo Creed and you just see like sweat flying off of his head because he's getting hit so hard. It was like that, and he popped him. It was a brutal brawl, but Goldust, unfortunately not making the list. Rick Rude, Jim Neidhart, Legion of Doom, Demolition, Big Show, Bam Bam Bigelow, Ted DiBiase and IRS, who really were more of a tag team in the early 90s before they both respectively retired. Rowdy Piper had a respectable run in WCW, but not nearly the impact that he had in the 80s. Ultimate Warrior, Davey Boy Smith, Owen Hart, of course, the great Owen Hart, Ken Shamrock, Road Dogg, Badass Billy Gunn, Big Boss Man, Val Venus, and last but not least, and I know this hurts Uncle Todd greatly, but The Godfather.
That one stings. I gotta be honest.
Charles Wright will not be joining the show anytime soon.
That one hurts. That was my sentimental pick.
Whoa, player.
Now I can either whip your ass. Yeah, no, that was, that was another guy who, I mean, after a lot of the gimmicks that he had, he was due for something that got over. Now he didn't quite make it as big as Kane, but at least it was, well, I don't know how respectable it was being a pimp, but I mean, at least he was over with the crowd. At least he didn't have he wasn't like the sucking black vortex of heat. You know?
He was one of those few guys that when you hear the first couple notes of their music, the place would just go nuts. It was like they would just hear that, and the crowd would be on their feet, erupt in cheers, and here he comes out doing the old, his old pimp strut that he would do or whatever. I mean, he was hysterical. He was hysterical.
And always accompanied by at least 2 or 3 or 4 ladies who worked at local dancing establishments, shall we say?
Yes.
Which got to make a living.
So, and so unfortunately we had to draw the line, and so the line has been drawn. Sir, any other thoughts on the 90s wrestling wise, or are you ready to jump into these brackets, sir?
No, what was that referee? I forget what his first name was, but he was a judge. He was actually a judge, wasn't he? Like the Mills guy?
I forget his name. You're right.
But just like he always used to say in all the death matches, let's get it on.
That's right.
Wow, there's another 90s reference that you don't hear. The MTV Celebrity Deathmatch. Oh my
It's almost like we should have just broken this into like two parts, like do bracket A and bracket B, and then do a bracket
because
C.
we definitely needed to spend more time on this episode. Yes,
well,
we totally did. Yeah.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
All right, so play-in bracket. This is going to be interesting.
Bracket. So, starting off opening rounds, we have Kevin Nash / Diesel. This is an interesting one because of the fact that it's almost like Diesel versus Diesel in a way.
Yes.
Or Diesel versus fake Diesel.
Yep.
Kevin Nash versus Kane, who, of course, as we alluded to, Glenn Jacobs was at one point faux Diesel when Vince thought he could keep the Diesel gimmick going, and, well, that just fell flat on its face.
No one will notice. No one will notice.
No one will notice.
Okay,
well,
Vin.
They did.
Whatever you say, Vince. Yeah, they noticed.
Yes. So Kevin Nash, basically and as we go through these, I should remind listeners. See, work creeping in there. Sorry. Oh my God. As we talk about these, we're trying to evaluate them from really just the decade that we're in, and not before and not after, and really trying to evaluate impact and to the business as a whole, and really the body of work across the decade. So we'll have some interesting discussions around that, because a few of these folks, even though they made it in, some of them didn't exactly have a long run in the 90s, but still were very impactful nonetheless.
Yes,
so
indeed.
with Kevin, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying yes, indeed. I was agreeing with you.
Oh, thank you. So with Kevin Nash, really in the, sorry, I was trying to pull up him online here. So was in WCW, kind of in the early part of the 90s, came to WWE in 93, had a run until 96, and then went to WCW from 96 to the end of the decade. Really in WWE came in as Shawn Michaels' bodyguard, then became his own man at some point, and ultimately world champion, beating Bob Backlund in 5 seconds, because someone
Bob.
at some point realized, why did we put the strap on Bob? But
well, that's what they did before Hogan too. Bob is always the man. He's the man before the man.
That is right.
He's not
that
the man.
Right.
He's the man sitting next to the man. Sitting next to the man.
Exactly.
Sitting next to the man.
Exactly.
Oh, jeez.
Actually, in some ways, Nash is the embodiment of wrestling in the 90s, because when you look at his early 90s stuff, he did the Master Blasters, he did Oz, he was Vinny Vegas. He runs through all these awful gimmicks, and then he becomes Diesel, works his way into a world champion, becomes a hot free agent when it comes time for contracts to be negotiated, goes to WCW, launches one of the most impactful factions with Scott Hall and Hogan in the New World Order, world champion again a few times. So I mean, by the time we get to the end of the decade, he has a pretty good resume of work that he's done over the course of that time period. So very impressive. So
yep, took advantage of the opportunities.
Indeed. And then we have Kane, Glenn Jacobs. And so here, Kane starts wrestling, or makes his debut, I believe it was in 97. Yeah, 97 is when the Kane character appears at, I believe it was Bad Blood.
Yes.
And In Your House in 97.
The first Hell in a Cell match. And so and makes a very impactful debut there. Goes on to have really an amazing run with The Undertaker, really having that story go for a better part of a year, continuing on into 98 and 99. Eventually they start to play around with the Kane character a little bit, being a babyface, teaming up with Taker. At one point he was teaming up with X-Pac, but yeah, just the Kane character just becomes this really having the story that goes as long as it does with the Undertaker, but having what Jacobs does with this, and the way that he puts forth Kane and is able to kind of adapt him over time after they kind of get through the initial Undertaker matchup, was impressive, because he could have been pigeonholed and could have been stereotyped into one role,
really kind of took this character and brought him into like new areas through his body acting and through a lot of the work that he did. But so those are the two. What are some thoughts that you have on both of these fine competitors, sir?
I mean, Kane, for the amount of time that we're going to be addressing the character, like you said, really 2-3 years max of the decade, had an outsized impact during that time. He was a bespoke opponent created, for the Undertaker, because they needed an opponent to kind of put up against the Undertaker, and he'd already run through everyone else. And to have the debut that he did, at the end of the first Hell in the Cell, which is already, a classic match in and of itself, to come down, rip off the door, to actually have the first time that the Undertaker really shows any emotion. That was the first time that the Undertaker looked shocked, that really showed any kind of emotion to anybody, when he came face to face with Kane, and then for Kane to tombstone Undertaker and leave him laying. I mean, that just didn't happen with Undertaker. So the debut in and of itself merits his inclusion here, because it had a huge impact on what was already an impactful character. And then I believe he actually won the WWE championship in this time too, in the first couple of years. He also had the what is it, Burned Alive, or the fire match.
The Inferno match.
The Inferno match, which is iconic. That was crazy. And of course all the back and forth with Undertaker, and just for those few years, like he was everywhere, and was all over the place. However, Kevin Nash, NWO, like you said, it essentially kickstarts the Monday Night Wars, the battle between WCW and WWE that would define wrestling going forward.
Yes. Not
just in this decade and between those two companies, but even now, like the business is still, in a way, still kind of trying to figure out how it's supposed to be structured without that direct competition. And it's been a vacuum ever since WCW got bought by Vince. Kevin Nash was one of the people behind that. And I mean, probably, I think, had the biggest impact, because he then went on to become Booker and all that stuff. So, I mean, in this matchup, as much as I love Kane and the character and everything there, I got to go with Kevin Nash. I mean, you have a bespoke opponent for the Undertaker, or you have one of the main people of the NWO. That didn't just change wrestling, that changed culture. So that was everywhere. So Kevin Nash wins this one for me.
I'm going the same way. I think you made some great points about Kane and the amount of impact that character had in a much more compressed period of time. We'll be talking about Kane in the 2000s bracket, because that character continues onward, through the 2000s, has impact there as well, and that kind of thing. But when you put them together, Nash across the decade, and especially with his work in WCW, which, let's be honest, is built upon the fact that he was a WWE guy. Like the entire NWO thing, resonates because there were barriers being kind of broken that had never really been broken before, and especially from a backstage perspective, when they come down and they say, when he and Scott Hall kind of introduce themselves from the north and that sort of thing, there's all this implication that they're from WWE and that they're invading, and there are fans that really thought that's what was happening. They really that was what was so interesting with the NWO, is there was this real suspension of reality in a way, because some folks actually thought this was happening, and so they did a great job of framing that and portraying that. And so I 100% go with Kevin Nash as well. Kane is good. Kane has his place, but right now in this bracket, I think it's Kevin Nash.
I agree.
All right, next match.
Yes,
sir. As I, the Sherpa, take you through the
we might have to
wrestlers.
We might need to give the Sherpa a little Red Bull here, because otherwise we're going to be here the entire night. I'm just pointing that out.
I'll move it along.
Okay.
But
I'm just saying, I've done my cardio. I'm ready. I'm ready to follow, sir.
All right. I had mine as well. I'm feeling good. Big Van Vader against Triple H. So this is an interesting one. Vader was a big part. His career is interesting because it's almost like the reverse of Nash. He kind of had a big splash in the early 90s. He was a monster heel in WCW, world champion. Just heavyweight. Oh God, I'm sorry.
I was going to say the super heavyweight. Like he was a large human being.
And intimidating. Like when he would fight, I mean, he was coming in brawling. He was using that size that he had in a very violent and vicious way,
and apparently stiff as hell to work with.
Yeah. Well, you see him punch, and it doesn't look like there's a whole lot being pulled on that one. So
no, I mean, Leon made sure that if you got to be sure, you just lay it right in there anyways, and you apologize afterwards. I guess was his philosophy.
Uncle Todd's doing the stone cold hands up, saying, "I was a little snug."
Yeah. Few taters in there. There's a few potatoes. That's all. Everything that Leon threw was like it was a potato. And who's going to argue with him? Who's going to go back and want to pick a fight with Vader after the match? You know?
Yeah, so he was a real staple in WCW, managed by Harley Race, which was great because Harley Race carried a lot of cachet, being, former world champion, former, opponent of Ric Flair's from the 80s and that sort of thing. So, he had a really great run, had some, great matches with, I believe with Sting, Cactus Jack, and then ultimately with I said, Cactus Jack, and then Ric Flair. Flair coming back from his time in WWE, and being a babyface against the heel Vader. Really kind of in a very non-Flair kind of way, being kind of the Rocky underdog in that story, and beating him for the world title. So Vader had a great run in the early 90s, and then he transitions over to WWE in 96, and this is where he comes in, but he's not. He comes in, he's kind of pushed as a monster, but not in the same way in WCW, and so he kind of languishes in the mid card. Had a feud with Shawn Michaels for the world title. Very strange match where he pins Michaels, but then they restart the match and then Michaels pins him. So it was very kind of anticlimactic because you thought Vader won and then Vader lost, and it was very. Well,
apparently, didn't Michaels not like working with him? Like he literally thought he was out. He was dangerous.
At that point in time, I wouldn't surprise me if Michaels didn't like him.
Yeah,
Michaels, I don't know that liked a lot of people. So
very true. This is before losing his smile and
yes,
and firmly when he was ensconced in his pain in the ass phase.
Yes. And then Vader just kind of petered out. He spent some time tagging with Owen Hart, and I believe he was part of a stable with Yokozuna, Owen Hart. And they would take on British Bulldog, and I think Ahmed Johnson, Jake Roberts. So, so just kind of languished a bit, and then he just kind of disappeared in '97. Left the company and went to All Japan Pro Wrestling. So Vader, having some early impact now. Triple H, probably don't need to run through all of his resume because I think folks are pretty familiar with him. Well, if you're a wrestling fan, but he comes to prominence in '95. Spent a little bit of time in '93 to 95 in WCW as the ironically named Terra Rising, which I just love that name.
What was a thought there? I don't know.
Let's do wordplay, shall we?
Pretty much.
But he then transformed into a kind of a French blue blood that teamed with Lord Steven Regal, and then he kind of took that gimmick into WWE as Hunter Hearst Helmsley, the Connecticut blue blood. So no longer doing French. Although if you do want to look that up, it was really funny to listen to Paul Levesque try to do a French accent. That was pretty funny.
I don't ever need to hear that. I just
Flair
don't.
made him do. He's like, oh, vivant, he hon. Anyways, so comes in 95.
French Canadian, maybe. I could buy that.
Yes,
like a really bad French Canadian accent. That would have been glorious, actually.
Yes. But yeah, comes in 95, languishes a little bit, has a few good feuds with some of the mid card guys, has some good stuff with a young Rocky Maivia, and then over time, becomes partnered up with Shawn Michaels as the Attitude Era begins, establishes DX, which again, similar to NWO, becomes quite influential in the Attitude Era. And just kind of grows in prominence from there. When Shawn Michaels leaves, takes over DX, really is one of the main drivers of that faction. Wins the Intercontinental Championship. A lot of great feuds with Rock, with Austin, and others. And then toward the end of the decade, becomes world champion. Through just that journey that he went on. So, his is an interesting story where it doesn't really kind of pick up until about, more in the late 90s, but just the presence he had across, WCW and WWE was just kind of one of just, incremental growth, and until finally he is, a main event guy at the end of the decade.
Yeah. If we were talking about, I would say that Vader, to me, is more like, what if Kevin Nash had never gone to WCW? What if all the high points were at the beginning of the decade, back when business was not at its best, when you're in that desert period and ratings are not even close to what they were in the 80s, let alone what they would be at the end of the decade when, there was literally millions and millions of people tuning into Monday Night Wrestling combined between the two shows. Whereas Triple H, I mean, granted, the beginning of the decade, not all that great, but when business was booming, he was once business really got rolling in the Attitude Era, he was a very integral part of the roster. Like even when he was in the mid card, he was one of those guys that, and you kind of need this in any kind of roster. It's like building any kind of roster. You got your stars, and you got kind of like, the folks who are, the Jags, just a guy. You need warm bodies down at the bottom to kind of keep things going, but you need solid people, like almost like in a basketball team, the six man.
Yeah.
Who in some cases could be a starter.
Yeah.
But they want that guy coming off the bench so that it provides a spark, and you want that kind of anchor when you're resting some of your top guys. He filled that nicely, and then even became that one of those top guys. Yeah. So, I mean, in my opinion, Triple H takes this one just because being that important to a company when business is that good outweighs being important to a company when business ain't really great.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and I would agree with that as well. I think Vader had a strong start in the early 90s, but really, I don't want to diminish what he did, but I mean, he just, when he came to WWE, I had greater hopes for him. And if he had gone on a similar run as he did in WCW with the world title, I think then it would be a harder decision. But because he didn't, it's easy to just kind of go with Triple H because of the fact that the impact, it just seems to be greater on that side. And there's a lot more memorable feuds from that, with, I named off a few names. Cactus Jack is another one that comes to mind, only because I remember Mick Foley, getting him on that table up on the Raw stage and doing that stunt pile driver he does that just looks so freaking vicious through the table with Triple H, and I mean, they just had brawls. And so he's someone who I think, impact wise and just growth wise was just stronger this decade. So I agree, going with him.
Yep.
All right. Next. Sorry.
I was just saying next.
Oh, okay. Next one is this is an interesting one. We have China, our sole female entrant,
wonder of the world, ladies and gentlemen,
wonder of the world, against DDP, Diamond Dallas Page.
Bang, bang.
Do you want to run through China? Because I know China is someone you have, and I don't mean this flippantly, like you have an affinity for because of the impact that she made in the 90s. So do you want to kind of walk through her credentials a little bit here?
Well, yeah, and I think because when we first were putting this together, because I didn't even think about it because I looked at your initial list and I didn't see anything, and then when I looked at it again, I'm like, wait a minute, China's not on there. And really, if you go back to where women's wrestling is right now, which I think is, if you look at women's wrestling now and you look at women's wrestling back in like pre-95, there's no direct path from where it's at now to where it was, because it was all hair pulling. I mean, I'm not even going to get into like where it was during the Attitude Era, where you had like bra and panty matches and all this, and Jerry Lawler doing puppies and all that. I'm just talking about like going back to like the Great Moolah school of women's wrestling, which was the hair mares and, you know, just like flopping around and nothing really high impact or nothing all that, you know, nothing all that great. There was nothing really technical about it, you know. It was just a spectacle, and it was like, okay, it's kind of like the popcorn match, you know, like okay, if you go get popcorn now, you're not missing much. China provides the beginning and a bridge to where women's wrestling is now, where you have women who are legit wrestlers and who, I mean, there's a reason why we've had women headlining WrestleMania in the past 5 or 6 years, and why those matches have found themselves higher and higher up the cards, and why in a lot of these pay-per-views that we've reviewed, I like the women's matches better than a lot of the men's matches, because I'm like, there's actual technical wrestling taking place here. You know, you can tell that they're going out there and they're really trying to get into the psychology of the match, because they're really trying to get over and to up the game. China starts all that. You know, she came in as Triple H's bodyguard and was really like Shawn Michaels and Triple H. After watching the China biography, I thought this was really interesting, how they really fought for her to be the bodyguard and not to just be a valet, because they're like, nobody has a female bodyguard. And you look at her and you're like, well, of course she could be, because dear God, I mean, have you seen her?
The death stare. I mean, that was the thing that stood out to me when you and I would watch those shows, is just that death stare she gave was like unheard of or just unparalleled. It
was just like there was nothing there. Like it's that sort of thing. Like it's a killer look, because it literally just doesn't care. Like, that person, you know, it's almost like Ivan Drago. Like if he dies, he dies, you know, that sort of thing. Like that was just the look. And that's all she had to do for so long, is just come out there, stand with her arms crossed and just stare. And everyone's watching her. You know, they're keeping one eye on her, because like, when's she going to do something? And then she finally started getting involved. And the fact was that, I mean, it went beyond what women's wrestling was at the time. And it started pushing this into this other area, and they started getting more women's workers and stuff like that. But she was actually getting involved with the men and becoming physically involved in matches. And like, eventually guys started selling for her and started getting her over. And she went on to, you know, to be the first woman to ever enter the Royal Rumble, back when it was just one Rumble match. There wasn't a women's Rumble match. It was just the Royal Rumble. She's the first woman to ever enter it. She was the first woman to ever win the Intercontinental Championship. And so far, the only woman to ever win the Intercontinental Championship, a men's title. You know, and she held the women's title and stuff like that, but that was kind of like an afterthought, you know, and that was when they tried to get her into the women's division and all that, and things kind of went haywire and went wrong and all that. But I mean, again, another person who affected culture beyond wrestling, in the same way that like the NWO was not just, you know, in the same way that Austin 316 wasn't just a wrestling thing. It became a cultural thing where people outside of wrestling, the same way that people do impressions of Macho Man Randy Savage, who don't even know squat about wrestling.
Oh yeah.
People knew who Chyna was. You know, I mean, she kind of transcended the business in a way. So, I mean, for her, I mean, it's kind of important to have her here, because this is really the beginning of where you get to the point where you have Becky Lynch, you have Charlotte Flair, you have, I mean, and before that, you have Lita, you have Trish Stratus, you have these women who are capable of doing this, and until you get to the point where you have a Bianca Belair, Sasha Banks main event for WrestleMania. You know, this is where it starts right here. And it's also the reason why, I mean, I have a feeling that we are going to see Rhea Ripley challenging for the IC belt at some point. I don't think it's that far down the road. I think that's where it's heading, because I mean, yeah, it'll be great to see her wrestle, Charlotte, but it seems like they're heading that direction with her,
Yeah.
So, but none of that happens unless you have China.
Yep. Well, I'll speak to Diamond Dallas Page, and then we'll talk about who we pick. But yeah, no, I hear on all counts. I mean, she certainly influential, certainly impactful, and really in a very compressed time period, very similar to Kane. I think it was 97 to 2000.
Yeah.
Diamond Dallas Page, his credentials, are really around being in WCW for the entirety of the decade, starting out as a manager, working his way into becoming a wrestler at some point in the mid 90s. Really turned the corner and became a wrestler late in his kind of athletic life, if you will. Most athletes, kind of function between the ages of 20 and 40. And, DDP, I believe, was starting to really get involved, wrestling wise, I think in around 95, 96, when he was, kind of in his late 30s, getting into his 40s. And really, as the Monday Night Wars heated up, he became, one of the linchpins. If Sting is up in the rafters staring down at the NWO and giving him the stink eye, DDP was really the first one to kind of start taking the war to them, and do it in a way that was really impactful, really got the crowd off their feet, and became kind of that people's champion, without saying it like The Rock, joked and did himself. I mean, Page would go in the crowd. That kind of became his thing. He when he won the world title, took it into the crowd and was with the people, and so he just kind of became the standard bearer of that decade, or the latter half of the decade, as just kind of that workman's champion, and had this really great finisher, the diamond cutter, which looked really impressive. I mean, I kind of put that up against the DDT in terms of the viciousness and the ability to kind of pull it out of nowhere. Before Randy Orton made that a thing. And so, yeah, I so for Page, just he had kind of a similar path as Kevin Nash did, maybe, not as impactful in terms of starting his own, kind of faction in the same way that Kevin Nash did. But at the same time, really being, one of the few soldiers that went against the NWO and was kind of fighting for, the WCW brand and franchise. And so that's DDP. But what, sir, is your selection on this one?
I'm going with China, just
All
for
right.
the fact of being so influential, for being a woman in a man's world, and for really getting to a point in this decade where in that very small period of time, really having an outsized influence and doing things that no one had done before.
Yeah. Yep.
I think that merits a win. DDP, believe me, anytime I see, older cats doing stuff, I'm happy because I'm now in that bracket. However, it just doesn't quite match up, but I want to run this by you because I wonder if I can play a little game of Stump the Man They Call Tim.
Okay.
And this falls within the 1990s.
Yes.
Did you know
that
Diamond Dallas Page actually was in the WWF in the 1990s?
I knew he was in the WWF. I didn't know it was was it 1990?
It was 1990.
Okay.
He was actually part of WrestleMania 6.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, he came in with Honky Tonk and Greg Valentine, right?
He drove the Cadillac.
Ah, very nice.
And apparently sitting passenger seat was Sensational Sherry in a wig.
Oh, really?
Playing like one of the Bobby Sock fans of Honky Tonk and Greg the Hammer Valentine.
They were called Rhythm and Blues.
Oh, yeah. And as we've talked about before, best forgotten. As forgotten.
Very nice, sir. I am impressed with pulling that nugget out.
Well, as Owen Hart would say, I am not a nugget.
Yes.
Actually, that was more Cartman. Sorry, Owen.
That was a good Cartman, though. While acknowledging China's contributions and impact and understanding why you chose her, I am a bit in the bag for Diamond Dallas Page and his contributions. So I am going to select DDP as the winner of this bracket for me.
All right, fine. So you go ahead and engage in your misogynistic ways. And
come on now. Well, then we should just skip ahead because China's going to be your pick in every bracket, moving forward, right?
I'm just giving you a hard time. I've had 3 seltzers here. I'm full of bubbles. I don't know what I'm talking about. All right, what do we got up next, sir?
All right, we're almost to the end of the play-in. So Ron Simmons versus Yokozuna.
Ooh, yeah.
This is a great one. Ron Simmons, having a really an outsized impact from really the beginning of the decade all the way through. In WCW, starting out in a tag team called Doom with Butch Reed, very, very intimidating, very, kind of powerhouse oriented and impressive, and they went on a really good run. And then in the early 90s, really one of the things Simmons is distinguished by is when he defeated Vader for the WCW Heavyweight Championship, he became the second African-American wrestler to win a World Heavyweight title, and the first, I believe, to win the WCW title. So
I thought he was the first.
First for WCW, I believe, second overall.
Okay.
I don't know who the first was. I'm wondering if it was from the 70s or not. But
okay.
That's a good point. I should probably look that up. But that is a distinction he has is having earned that. Especially starting out as a tag team wrestler, and kind of was in the mid card, but had a really good feud with Vader that resulted in that championship win. And then now for you, sir, a little factoid for you. Did you know Ron Simmons did wrestle for ECW?
I do seem to remember that, and you know what? It was a very brief stint, but it would make sense because
yes.
Ron is another one of those guys who it's like everything that he does, like his spine buster is one of it makes me hurt when I watch it because it is so fast and so crisp, and just the sound is just different.
Yeah,
than anybody else, and it's just that wham, and you're like, oh dear God.
Yep.
That had to sting a little bit. Oh my gosh. But yeah, no. Oh, he would be the perfect person for extreme championship wrestling. Like people would be actually terrified of him. Like, he knows this is fixed, right? Right?
Oh, that's funny. So from ECW in that short stint, he goes to WWE. As we alluded to, he starts out in a gladiator gimmick as Farouk, which looks like he was probably part of the cast of WrestleMania 9 when they were in Vegas, hauling people in on the old Roman, not sleds, those thrones that they would carry on their shoulders. That was Simmons initially, and then later that year, he basically transitioned out of that gimmick into becoming the leader of the Nation of Domination, which did become, a really strong faction, for basically that 96 to 98 period. Had a lot of great feuds, had a great, kind of breakup feud with The Rock, who was part of the Nation at the time. And The Rock kind of took over and cast him out. I was actually present for a show in Durham, New Hampshire at the hallowed halls of UNH and the Wintermore Center when Raw came to town. And that was the episode where Stone Cold threw the Intercontinental title off the General Sullivan Bridge in Newington. But one of the things I very distinctly remember, just one of those memories that just burns in your brain because you're just floored when you see this guy. Simmons is just huge. I mean, he just walks down and I'm like, that man's arms are just insanely huge.
Oh yeah.
He was, I mean,
tree trunks for arms. Like his that's one of those dudes that you look at and it's like their biceps are like most people's, like most big people's thigh, and then you look at his thighs, you're like, oh, that's my waist.
Yeah. Yeah, so just an impressive athlete, and just a fun time, to see like we had second row seats, very very close. Just had a great time seeing that. But yeah, Simmons was just so impressive. And I think that was around the time he and The Rock were kind of going through that nation breakup thing, which was pretty fun to watch. So, but from the nation, Simmons then goes on and becomes part of the Acolytes with Bradshaw. At first, they're kind of like these demonic, subjects of the Undertaker, and then if one thing with Simmons is this, he somehow turns something that was intended for one gimmick and then turns it into something that was almost on the complete other extreme of that gimmick. So he goes from Farouk the gladiator to the leader of kind of like a Black Panther Party kind of group. Then he goes and starts out as this demonic, kind of subject, and then becomes the beer swilling, cigar smoking, card playing, counterpart to John Bradshaw Layfield as the Acolyte Protection Agency, who become hired guns that just kind of came down to the ring and beat the snot out of people when people paid them. So
one of my favorite gimmicks ever. I just love that.
Brilliant gimmick. It was a brilliant gimmick.
And they had they would set up a door frame. No walls, just a door in a door frame with like 2x4s to keep it upright, and you had to go up and knock. And there was that time that The Rock went around and like, why are you not knocking on the door? He goes out and knocks on the door like, hey man, how you doing? Oh, it's like, oh my gosh, it's so ridiculous, but at the same time, it's like, what a life these guys lead. Like, wait a minute, so we get paid to wrestle.
Yeah.
And as part of the show, you want us just to sit around, play cards, drink beer, and smoke cigars. Are we sure this is legal? Like, is it legal to have this much fun? Like, come on. And we just get to go and like kick people's butts. Like, we don't really ever take a beating. Yeah. They all do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
So that is Ron Simmons in a nutshell across the 90s. And then we have Yokozuna, who, before I finish with Ron Simmons, how can we forget his impactful one word line that he utters whenever he's on the camera nowadays?
The greatest catchphrases ever.
Damn.
Ever. Which is great because it was, again, it's like, the reason they put the AP8 together, they're all sitting around drinking beer and playing cards and stuff, so you might as well do it on camera. And apparently, that's Ron Simmons has just been saying that forever. Like, just anything is damn, you know, and it would have all these different connotations because there's times it would be an exclamation, other times you're like, damn, just disappointment. It's so great, so great.
And then Yokozuna had a very, in a lot of ways, Yokozuna mirrors a bit of Vader, in terms of having a really strong kind of early 90s, just being this monster heel, sumo wrestler type who wrestles his way into the world championship picture, beats Bret Hart. WrestleMania 9 is just what a joke of a main event. I shouldn't say that. Bret Hart and Yokozuna was a great match because Bret Hart wrestling against someone who, in theory could just throw him around, like a rag doll, and just had Bret Hart had great matches with everyone at this time.
Also, keep in mind, much like Vader, Yoko was, for his size, pretty damn light on his feet.
Yes.
Same as Vader.
Yes.
Like, Vader could actually move around for a guy that size, which is frightening when you think about it. Like, someone that big shouldn't move that fast. Like, that's just not fair.
Yeah.
That's not right.
Absolutely. And so, so Yokozuna loses the world title. He does have the distinction, a couple months later, of being, the man that basically pins Hulk Hogan, gets the world title, and then that's when Hogan leaves WWE and goes to WCW. So so Yoko has a several year run, as kind of world champion, like 1 or 2 years as kind of dominating the world title picture. But then after that, I don't know if that's, I remember watching it wasn't biography, but it was some show on WWE Network that was looking into his life.
Icon.
Yeah, I think it was. And so I don't know if mid 90s is roughly when he started to really bulk out and his health was really starting to get called into question. But he then later, tags with Owen Hart, managed by Jim Cornette, I believe, and really, in a lot of ways, kind of goes the path of Vader, where he just more and more is kind of languishing, and then I believe he ends up getting released I think let me just look him up real quick. Gets released.
Well, part of it was he was getting so big, and then he was slowing down because his gimmick was always the fact that he was big, but then he started to slow down, and they were like, I think the WWE, I believe in the biography they only talked about him doing the Duke weight loss program at home, but I think they also tried to actually send him to a place like. They tried twice to try and get his weight under control, and eventually they released him because of like he was just it was getting to the point where he was going to die on their hands.
Right.
And I think they were just like, we can't have this.
Yeah, it was like 98 is when he was released. So yeah, so he had a strong start, but unfortunately, due to health and otherwise, was let go. So what say you, sir, on this bracket? We have Ron Simmons and Yokozuna. Who are you going with?
I mean, Yoko, multi-time, at least twice, heavyweight champion, multi-time tag champion, I believe, and was like you said, monster heel. However, Ron, I mean, was impactful throughout most of the decade.
Yeah.
And I did look it up, and it's weird. I'm getting two different answers from Ron Simmons' own Wikipedia page. It says that he was the first African-American WCW heavyweight champion. And then when I just Google, because then I'm like, okay, well, who was the first? Because they're like, he was the first there and the second overall. And then I Googled who was the first African-American wrestling champion, and it comes up with Ron Simmons. So I'm like,
let's give it to him. Let's give it to him. The Google doesn't lie.
Yeah, I mean, apparently that's what WWE is claiming, that he is the first legit African-American champion of a major promotion. So, I mean, I'll go with it. Whatever.
Gotcha.
I think he gets the nod there because not only did he accomplish that, and yeah, he didn't have a long title reign, but it's a moment. It's one of those things, sort of like with someone like China, where it's bigger than the business in a way. But then you also get into the fact that like he had impact as the head of the Nation of Domination. He was also the acolytes, and then also the APA. Like all of that happened within the stretch of a few years, which is kind of crazy. And you look at the fact that the group that he was in launched The Rock, D-Lo. I mean, he was always on TV and always a presence. And like you said, he was just one of those guys that you remembered watching because it felt like you actually felt him through the TV screen. Like that's how high impact he was.
I mean, he was one of the guys you look forward to seeing every Monday because it's like, what is the APA going to do now? Or what is the Nation going to do now? And you brought up a really good point I should have mentioned, which is, in the same way that, the group Evolution in the 2000s was meant to, elevate Randy Orton and Batista through association with Flair and Triple H. Ron Simmons, like you just said, in a lot of ways, Nation of Domination was to elevate Rock, was to elevate D-Lo, was to elevate, those in the group, and that gets missed sometimes because he still was an active wrestler. It wasn't like he was, really toward the end of his career, but he was doing that giving back to the business sort of thing, with those young guys and helping get them over and get them established to move on to bigger and better things. And
he's
Rock
in a way
definitely, benefited from that.
In a way, he's sort of like the receiver who's playing opposite Jerry Rice.
Yes.
What was the guy's name? Taylor something. Something Taylor.
John Taylor?
John Taylor. When Jerry Rice was first starting out playing, like, yeah, it's great you have Jerry Rice, but there's very few players that you can have no one on the other side of any note and still accomplish what he did. Like, you have to be somewhat good on the other side. Yeah. And he had that kind of, it's a bit of a thankless job. But if you look at like all these talent getting elevated and people getting over and things happening, like Ron was there throughout all of that in the WWE as the Attitude Era was progressing. So I got to give it to Ron.
Our final play-in bracket is actually two members of the 1980s bracket we've talked about already. So we'll try to keep this one short and sweet. But we have the Nature Boy, Ric Flair, woo! Against the Macho Man, Randy Savage. Dig it. Cream of the crop. So real quick, I think Flair's big distinction in the 90s is really across WWE and WCW. He had a 1-year run in WWE, or no, was it 1 or 2 years?
I think it had to be 2, wasn't it? Because he did. If not, he did a lot.
Yeah, 2 years. 2-year run, comes in with what was at the time the NWA World Heavyweight Championship, which again that was the closest that was kind of the first barrier really in the 90s to get broken, was to see that gorgeous big gold belt on WWE TV, declaring himself
heavyweights champion, the real heavyweights champion.
I love how
of
you
the world.
He did it that way too. The real,
yeah,
in that Flair way where he would start out soft and then crank the volume up. And the real.
Yep, the real world's heavyweight champion.
Oh my gosh! And pairing him up with Heenan was just like, my God, it's like
how much heat can you possibly have? That's like a sun.
It's burning. Be fair to Flair.
Oh my gosh.
I remember Heenan during the Royal Rumble when he comes in as number one. He's like, be fair to Flair.
Wow.
It's fantastic. But he does have the distinction of winning the first Royal Rumble that was that had the stakes of the World Heavyweight Championship up for grabs. Had a really good run with that title. Had a great feud with Randy Savage. Albeit a little under auspicious circumstances, but the old "I was with Elizabeth before you" routine apparently seemed to gain a little
Which
bit.
Has an extra sting with Flair because like he can make you believe it. Like that's one of those things where you're like, I don't know, man, did this actually happen? Like,
yeah. You
just never know. I mean, he is
my gosh,
he is a kiss stealing, wheeling, dealing son of a gun.
And so had a really strong run. Had a great feud with Kurt Hennig while he was in WWE, which ultimately led to his leave. Sorry, the feud didn't lead to his leaving, but he had that feud as his last feud before he left, and it was a really good one. Then he comes to WCW, as we talked about, beats Vader for the World Heavyweight Championship. I'm looking at this on Wikipedia, and I found this really interesting. I didn't notice this when I was going through before. Apparently, he has the distinction on April 30th of 1995. Flair wrestled Antonio Inoki, get this, in front of 190,000 spectators in Pyongyang, North Korea, at the Mayday Stadium in a losing effort under a joint show between New Japan Pro Wrestling and WCW.
Jeez.
200,000 people, dude. I had absolutely no idea. I had never heard of this.
Yeah,
so
that's an insane. I mean, that's just an insane number.
It is
no matter how you cut it.
So big impact there. And then, his other distinction during the 90s is being really the foil for the NWO with the Four Horsemen. And in some ways being that sacrificial lamb. The Four Horsemen, strong group throughout the 80s. But when we get to the 90s, Arn Anderson are older. And
it's like those two guys and just two other randos.
Yeah, I mean that was when Steve McMichael was a horseman, which I always thought was hysterical.
I actually had to check before this show to make sure that I was not a horseman. And I didn't notice. I didn't know. I didn't find a membership card, so I guess I'm out.
Don't know why they didn't call up Ole.
I think there's a very good reason they didn't call up Ole. Yeah. He's a grumpy guy. They're like, he's no fun.
Yeah. But yeah, so the Horsemen were a big part of that feud for a long time, and then he won the World Heavyweight title again. Throughout I think one or two more times in the 90s to get to his 16th reign. So just Flair had a really good. Really, the 90s were probably a continuation of the success in the 80s. And in a lot of ways, he was just a core, piece of the WCW machine, especially with getting over the NWO. Randy Savage, on the other hand, started out the 90s with a really strong feud with the Ultimate Warrior, but that ended up, I believe, being a career-ending match. And really, he spent much of the 90s as a color commentator, and in some ways was in retirement. And then he left WWE. He wanted to go back to wrestling. And so in WCW, he went over there with Hogan, saw some success there. I believe he was a world heavyweight champion one or two times, part of the NWO. But even though he had presence and even though he was a part of that, I don't know that he broke any new ground from where he was in the 80s. I think, the 80s for him was really when he established himself as that kind of cultural icon with all the silly sayings that we've been saying, from him with cream of the crop and so forth. The 90s was really just kind of a rehash of Randy Savage from the 80s, but in WCW. And so,
well, you also have to keep in mind, this was the snap into a Slim Jim era for Macho Man. And
fair enough.
Whether, as goofy of a crap as that is, as goofy as a hook to hang your hat that is, that did cross culture. It's one of the reasons why, we are kind of talking about him, is because he did, once again, he kind of managed to be one of those guys who transcended the business and that people knew about, because you're like, who is this wacky dude who is talking to me about Slim Jims, And actually wasn't, if I remember right, wasn't this also the time he was in the first Spider-Man movie? Wasn't that in the 90s, or was that
that was in the 2000s?
Okay. All right. Then
that
never
was
mind.
In the 2000s.
Forget I ever said that.
No worries. So for me, really, when you put the two of them together, Flair and Savage, both impactful during the 90s, but I'm going to actually give the nod to Flair this time. I feel like, he kind of had a resurgence and really had a strong run throughout most of it, and was a, really kind of a cornerstone, piece of WCW, to the point of, being that sacrificial lamb to allow this other group to really rise to prominence and that sort of thing. But all the time, it was always back to, Flair was not far from, the world title picture, or from the main event picture, and was called upon to really kind of, fill that role. So I'm going to go with Flair over Savage, unlike the WrestleMania 8 result.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree as well, because first and foremost, Ric Flair was kind of the first guy to really walk between two worlds, and have that idea of you can have the dream match of Flair versus Hogan for the first time ever. That was kind of a big thing once you got into that era of television making wrestling bigger, even though business is down and all that. It was still a very big deal, and the Rumble win, and then just, of course, also being the standard bearer in a way for WCW, even though a lot of the company didn't want him to be, but they had to keep going back to him because he was just there, and he's just that damn good. He just is. They tried to get rid of him. I don't know how many times, with goofy, stupid stuff, but it was he was one of the most believable characters because he was that character. He lived the gimmick,
Yeah.
So I got to give it to the Nature Boy.
Nice. All right. Well, we're now in the official bracket after all that hemming and hawing about the plan.
3 hours later, that's good. Now
I'm thinking
only another 6 to go, folks. We're humming right along.
I'm thinking these first 3 we can run through pretty quick because we've already kind of done the overview. So
a lightning round. I like it.
So for my first quarterfinal matchup, right? Is that right? No, so let me see. Final, semifinal, quarterfinal. I don't know what this is.
No, I don't think we're in quarterfinals yet.
Kevin Nash for me versus Triple H. Who do you have in your first?
I've got
round?
Nash versus Triple H. We've got Click versus Click here.
Yes, we do. Clicksters. What is your selection, sir?
Well, here's the thing. Kevin Nash, incredibly influential. However, you also have to look at some of the negatives when you get a little bit beyond that play-in, okay? Nash was also a booker and presided over a lot of the downturn of WCW as well. When WWE gained ground and started going back and forth, the finger poke of doom, and this is Nash kind of writing some of these things up. It could be argued that he presided over a down period when he was WWF champion, which not necessarily his fault. The entire business was in downturn, but then he also presided over the booking of, the beginning of the downturn for WCW, whereas Triple H was on the upswing. And I just think that there's not as much of a stank on him yet. The reign of terror is yet to come.
Yes. Yes.
So I'm going to go with Triple H here.
All right. I'm actually going to go with Kevin Nash. And my reasoning behind this is when you look at body of work and impact, both of them are impactful, both of them influential clearly in the decade. But I feel like, with Kevin Nash's run being longer and the fact that, NWO came first and he was kind of that standard bearer for that barrier breaking sort of thing with Scott Hall, where they, really were kind of blurring those lines between is the WWE really invading or not? I got to give the nod to Nash. Triple H is coming to prominence, and as we said, is kind of king of the castle, kind of at the end of the decade. But Nash has been king for much longer. And to your point, yeah, he made some missteps and is part of some of those things. But I feel like the good outweighs the bad here. So I'm going to go Kevin Nash on this one.
Yeah, no, I think it's a legit choice either way.
All right, next round one match. DDP for me versus Ron Simmons. For you, I believe it is China versus Ron Simmons.
Yes, it is.
And what say you, sir?
This one's tough because I'm a big fan of Ron Simmons, but I think that the way that China changed an entire portion of the industry that was just literally, it was just this kind of thing it was the appendix of the wrestling business at that point. It wasn't even a big deal. Like, no one paid attention to it or thought about it at that point. Like, there was no women's wrestling at this point to speak of in any kind of mainstream sense. And it's really a coin toss. I could see either one of these on a different day. I'm just going with China this time because I happen to think that it's a huge ask to get her to all of a sudden turn an entire part of the industry that no one really gave two craps about into something that people did care about, and that now is on a somewhat equal footing as the guys.
Yeah,
I think that's a lot. So I'm going with China.
Fair enough.
Who you got?
In my bracket, I have DDP against Ron Simmons, and I am going to advance. Again, Ron Simmons, impactful. Where he went and really, really had a, excuse me, damn fizzy water. It sneaks up on you.
Ron Simmons. Oh,
damn.
Yeah, exactly.
But for me, DDP was just that. In some ways was, or not in some ways, he was that workers, kind of champion, and probably, this is all really kind of based on our bias of what we like, but I just really like his story. I like the way, even though he was older and, was really playing a young man's game, he, was able to thrive and really, just had a really great career, during the mid to late 90s, through the wrestling he did, through being world champion. I forgot to mention, he had the feud where, really kind of broke into mainstream media with the Karl Malone, and him versus Hogan and Rodman. That was a huge deal. And so his impact, he was someone who should not have been as successful as he was. And because of his hard work and because of the way he kind of worked his way through, I got to give the nod to DDP. So, love Ron Simmons, but I feel like DDP gets the nod here.
Damn.
All right. Our next first round matchup is Ric Flair versus The Undertaker.
Oh, I thought you were going to like some sort of gobbledygook or something.
No,
I was
trying to do the Dawn. I should have done Rest in Peace.
Yes.
Do it. So we've already overviewed Flair's run in the 90s. Really, in a lot of ways, the 90s is The Undertaker. He debuts in 1990 and just goes on this ridiculous run that we've just never seen any other wrestler go on, in terms of dominance. A lot of it having to do with the character he portrayed and the way that character was so different from anything that we had seen up to that point. This is probably one of the shining examples of when WWE creativity can be really good. And so Mark Calloway, coming in and becoming this iconic Undertaker who feels no pain, who seems invincible, and who just runs roughshod over everyone. In the early 90s, being that kind of comic book kind of character, and then morphing into something, more demonic as you get into the, later 90s, and more nuanced in terms of, starting to, move into that American, badass, sort of realm, which comes later in the 2000s. But yeah, just has a lot of just really iconic matches. Has a couple world title runs. Of course, will be known in forever in time for the the Hell in the Cell 1998 match with Mick Foley, where he and Foley just had that classic of a match that just superseded any. I mean, there was a lot of danger and a lot of things that could have gone wrong in that match, but they didn't. And because of it, he and Foley are known for just this violent, vicious match that was just amazing to watch. And I come back to it often, and I'm still kind of in awe by it, even 30 years later, so, or 25 years later. But nonetheless, so any other thoughts on the Undertaker?
No, you got it. I mean, the man, the myth, the legend, and protected his character, and that was also a huge part of that too. Just
yes,
I'm sure there's a lot of times that he was kicked back on things, and ended up becoming like the judge back. That locker room didn't get out of hand.
Yeah,
to the point of going and putting his gloves on and taping his hands up one time when he thought that Shawn Michaels might not do business and was ready to run down to the ring to make sure the things went the way they were supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
That takes a certain stature in more ways than one.
Yes. And I forgot to mention too, early in his career, pinned Hulk Hogan for the world championship. But was then later, through shenanigans, by Jack Tunney, is how the 92 Rumble became about, the world championship, which Ric Flair won, which I believe you mentioned, in our correspondences over the course of the week. We have a listener who has submitted a show idea that we review the 1992 Royal Rumble, which we must do.
Yeah, we'll have to get to that. Although once we get through these brackets, sometime 5 months from now, we'll have to give folks a little bit of a break from wrestling before we get on that. But yes.
Fair enough. All right, sir. So between Ric Flair and The Undertaker, who are you going with?
This was a tough one, but I'm going with Taker.
Yep. I am as well. To me, it's not as hard of while Flair had a strong 90s, I think compared to The Undertaker had a stronger decade. Really, for all the reasons we just talked about, and really, just one of the, he just goes down in history, and especially if you just look at the 90s, as just a man with a very unique gimmick, great finisher, and just all around, just monster heel, and monster babyface when he turned. So, So Undertaker it is, going into the quarterfinal round.
Yes.
All right. Stone Cold Steve Austin. You knew we were going to get to him at some point, against Hollywood Hulk Hogan. This is fantastic. Two of the icons of their respective promotions.
The dream match that never was.
Yeah, dream match that never was. Well said. So, Steve Austin. One thing I got to say about, I know we're trying to move this along, but I do got to tell this story. One of the things I love about Steve Austin when he was in WCW, and was, with Brian Pillman in the Hollywood Blondes, again, started out as a singles wrestler, had a great run as part of Paul Heyman's, crew. I think it was called the Dangerous Alliance, then gets thrown into a tag team with Brian Pillman. And I just remember this, watching when I went to college in 93, I was down in Connecticut, and in New Hampshire, we just don't get TBS, or at the time we didn't get TBS Superstation, got it down there. So I'm watching WCW Saturday night, and every single time those guys came out, and Austin did the camera, the invisible camera bit where he holds up, he didn't have a camera, but he was pretending he was holding one up and spinning the dial like he was running it. That cracked me up every time he did it. It was the funniest thing. But then they get in the ring and they're so vicious. You know what I mean? That was the great part with Austin, was he was just one of those guys that could go, and he had kind of an Arn Anderson viciousness to the way he fought in the ring and stuff, and that I really enjoyed. And so I was excited when he came into WWE. saddled with a bad gimmick, but turned it around. Large part, got to give a big nod to Jake the Snake on that one, because we don't have an Austin 316 without born again Jake Roberts, and so he really. From there, just was hitting on all cylinders. Had a great feud with Bret Hart, amazing WrestleMania match, that I Quit match where just blood is flowing out of his head as he's trying to fight out of the sharpshooter, and then he just passes out. Was just, that is such an iconic moment in wrestling overall. And then just the amazing run he goes on with just becoming, that foundational piece of WWE, being a world champion and carrying the company on his shoulders for the rest of the decade. Hogan, had a, Hogan comes into the 90s as the champ. He, loses the belt a few times, wins it back, but ultimately goes to WCW because WWE needs to move on. And he establishes, with Nash Hall as part of the NWO. And so, was world champion for a fair amount of time in the 90s, really, kind of the cornerstone of that promotion, both to the benefit and the detriment of it. But yeah, overall, it's taken a what everyone viewed as the baby face and turning him villain in a move that no one ever saw coming. And it was shocking. It was really shocking at the time when it happened. And so, and then he just kind of, played it up from there and had a great run in the 90s. So both of this is a tough one, because both of them, you could make an argument, they both had very strong decades.
Oh, totally. Yeah. For me, it just comes down to the fact that, Hogan was the face of the first golden age of wrestling in the 80s. Austin is not only the face of the second golden age. Mm-hmm. I mean, Austin 316 shirts were everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the biggest selling merch items of all time in wrestling. Yeah. If not the biggest. It might still be the biggest, but I mean, those things were everywhere. But also was a different type of was really the anti-hero champion. Mm-hmm. And the feud with him and Vince changed the way that wrestling storytelling is told, for good or ill. And if you ask Uncle Corny, we're definitely in the for ill section, because Uncle Corny ain't a big fan of that, but changed wrestling as a whole. Hogan, yes, he was champ. He had the back and forth with the WWE, and then when he went to WCW, he was part of the NWO. I don't give him that much credit for the NWO, if only because had WCW chosen well enough, they could have had a third person do that. The NWO was already being established. Bringing in Hogan, it gives it a boost, but that could have been somebody else if it had been done correctly.
Right.
Hogan was sliding into something that was already in progress.
And in large part was due to the two people he was paired with. It was more about that invasion piece from the two of them than it was about him,
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And they really dictated how that thing went.
Yep.
I give him a huge amount of credit for being able to play the heel after being the good guy for all that time.
Yeah.
But to me, like, Stone Cold Steve Austin just defined wrestling in the 90s, even though if you look at it, like, his impact was in a not, in not a substantial portion of the 90s. And I mean, of course, you can go back to his time in WCW and being that guy who was underrated and just misused and all that. And even then going into ECW, where, I mean, you look at some of his promos and stuff there where he's like impersonating Hogan and this and that and the other. It was kind of like a little bit unhinged. Like it like you then understand where like 2000s Austin came from when he was kind of doing some of the wacky stuff. Then you're like, oh, this ties in. But Stone Cold is my pick. Like, I think in 90s wrestling, that's who I think of.
And I would agree. I'm going with Stone Cold as well. Couldn't have said it better myself.
Oh, hell yeah.
Hell yeah. All right, moving on. Next round one, or first round bracket, Goldberg versus HBK, Shawn Michaels.
Here's two opposites.
Oh my gosh. So I don't need to even look at Wikipedia to summarize Goldberg's run, because it was pretty much goes like this. Had an undefeated streak, won the world title, lost the world title, and then just kind of languished. So
pretty much.
That was pretty much Goldberg in a nutshell. I mean, to I don't want to say to his credit, but to the company's credit, it was one of the moments when something that was truly different and creative on their side really shined. And, they found this guy who looked like a legit, MMA sort of, badass and would come in and would kick the tar out of people. And you're like, oh, I want to see this guy. You basically wanted to see him do the squash. That's what you wanted to see.
Yeah. And they managed to give a big fight feel to a squash match, which is, I mean, that's something right there.
Yes.
That people are that up for it. I'll give him credit for that for sure.
But then once the undefeated streak ended, once he lost the world title, there was a lot of mystique that went with that. And because of that, now, he had a real hard time working that gimmick from that point on, because that's all he was. He wasn't a guy who was going to go, 20, 30, 40 minutes. He was in for the, 5 to 7 minute squash, and that was it. And so not
a fantastic talker either. So that was the other thing. Yeah, not king of the
fantastic
promo.
Growler, fantastic headbutter of doors, so that he comes out bleeding off his forehead, but not a talker.
Well, then he also ended Bret Hart's career, so I mean that's kind of a demerit if you look at it.
That is true. That is true.
Here's one of the most talented wrestlers to ever enter the ring, and 4-move Henry here, and guess who's going to come out of this still working? Yeah, because life isn't fair. See also Stevie Ray Vaughan.
Yes. And then you have on the other side of things, you have Shawn Michaels. And the 90s are just exemplified by his achievements and really rising to the main event status, carrying WWE through a very tumultuous period when their business is not great, as well as during the initial phases of the Monday Night Wars. But during the 90s, started out as one of the Rockers, broke off that tag team in just an iconic way. I mean, people who saw the barbershop where he threw Jannetty through the barbershop window was very shocking and violent for its time. It really was not the norm of what you would see on the wrestling show. And so that's how he started off. He then goes on to become Intercontinental Champion, goes on to win Tag Champion with Diesel, and eventually gets to the main event level, wins the World Championship, and has just great matches with everyone he's in the ring with, just becoming that, he wasn't called this during the 90s, but becomes that Mr. WrestleMania kind of guy. I mean, he is the icon that at one point in the mid 90s, to counteract what Hogan was doing in WCW, he would call himself the icon that can still go, because implying that Hogan could not, which wasn't that far from the truth. So, but
it's the type of thing where Hogan could have a Hogan match with anybody. Yeah. Shawn Michaels could have a great match with anybody. It didn't have to be a Shawn Michaels match. Yeah. He could work with anybody.
Yeah. So, and then you have in the mid to late 90s, he's carrying the company, starts DX with Triple H, has, good match with Stone Cold Steve Austin, has a great feud with Bret Hart that blows up into the Montreal Screwjob, which, as we all know, he was a part of. And really just, we find him between DX and between DX and the Montreal Screwjob really being, kind of the vortex of a lot of drama and change that's going on in WWE. And so the 90s, for him, he does, I believe in 98, he does end up having to retire because of the back issue. Once he drops the title to Austin, he really is out of the business for the final 2 years of the decade, as he's healing up and dealing with other issues and that sort of thing. And so real strong period for him. So for you, sir, any other thoughts on Michaels, and who are you going with?
HBK.
Don't need to discuss it any further. Absolutely.
No, it's pretty cut and dry to me. I mean, Goldberg, again, like it's something to say that you can pull off turning a squash match into feeling like it's, freaking Tyson versus Holyfield or, something like that. Like that's an accomplishment, and he gets credit for that because he was that character and he pulled it off, and he lived out the gimmick and all that. Yep. But a one-trick pony. Yeah. And Michaels was just Shawn Michaels, and he was a tremendous pain in the ass by all accounts, and even by his own. And there's times when it's like, that's the price you pay for having someone who is just that damn good. They're going to be a pain in your neck, but you put up with it because, well, he draws money.
That's right. Thank you, Vince. All right. Moving on to our next matchup. Bret the Hitman Hart versus Chris Jericho in the Battle of the Canadians.
I was going to say, are we in the Winnipeg division here?
Like, I think we are. Les Champions.
Actually, no. It would be isn't it Calgary? No, Jericho's from Winnipeg.
From Winnipeg. Bret's from Calgary, Alberta.
Okay.
Yep.
I know things about Canada.
Good man.
I mean, not much, but
good man. All right. Well, we'll try to get through this quick, as Bret, much like Shawn Michaels, just had a really, really strong 90s, becoming Intercontinental Champion, defeating Mr. Perfect. Goes on to have great feuds around that belt. I believe he drops it to the Mountie. Oh my God, he dropped it to the Mountie? Really?
That's one of my favorite things you've ever done in this show. Please tell me that wasn't planned.
That was not planned.
And he dropped it to the Mountie. Dear God, what the hell was that?
Who made that decision? Good Lord.
Somebody get Vince on the phone right now so I can cuss him out.
Oh my gosh.
Get Vince on the phone and get Jim Cornette on the phone too. Make this a 3-way call so we can both cuss him out all over again.
And for those who don't know, the Mountie, the gimmick was he was a power-hungry, corrupt member of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
Which is something that is the worst fiction because it doesn't even fall vaguely in the realm of possibility.
No,
it's just not going to happen.
And then, not to mention that when his music would come on, and I remember this because it was the strangest thing. He would come out and he was called the Mountie, but his song starts out, "I'm not the Mountie." I'm like,
oh my!
Then why do you call yourself the Mountie? I don't get it.
Now I want Vince on the phone so I can cuss him out over this. How dare you, sir? How dare you?
Good Lord.
All right. Anyways, before we get too into this, Bret Hart,
into the weeds. So basically,
the best there ever was, the best there ever will be.
92 to 96 World WWF Champion. Loses the belt. I believe he lost it to Shawn Michaels at some point along the way. Michaels becomes champ. We have a bit of the Canada versus U.S. thing kind of toward the end of the decade, ultimately leading into the Montreal Screwjob, where Bret goes to WCW, gets horse kicked in the face by Goldberg, and his career is finished. So, but Sorry to go so short on this, because I mean we are trying to move this along a little bit, but Bret Hart had a very prolific time in the 90s, really carrying the company in the early to mid part of the decade before Michaels took over, and really establishing himself as that fighting and great champion. His matches were like Michaels. I mean, he could have a great match with everyone, and it was a real pleasure to watch him wrestle, and got to see him live in down in Worcester, $1.25 probably $2.50 now, but
well, you remember that guy? What was his name? It was like Tom Zink or something like that.
Yeah,
and he went on to be like Z-Man, and WWF signed him based on a match a dark match he had with Bret Hart.
Yes. Yeah.
And then afterwards they realized that was mostly because of Bret.
Yeah.
This guy is not very good.
Yeah.
He looked like $1 million in the ring with Hart, because I mean, again, Bret Hart could make me look good. And I'm saying that now as a guy who's been out of the ring for 20 years and had a stroke, and he could still make me look good.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was just how good he was.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you have his opponent Jericho, who is wrestling throughout the 90s, but not in a real what's the word I'm looking for? Not in a prominent way. He's wrestling in the indies. Excuse me. He's wrestling in the indies throughout most of the early 90s. He goes to ECW in 96, goes to WCW from 96 to 99. He does really make an impact there. Is a cruiserweight champion. Does some really funny comedy. At the time, Dean Malenko was called the Man of 1,000 Holds, and Jericho was feuding with him, so he deemed himself the Man of 1,001 Holds, which was kind of fun, or 1,002, I think. He was doing a riff on Goldberg, where he would have his security man Ralphus, come and knock on on his door to bring him out to the I mean, Jericho was just doing some really good stuff that just brought a lot of entertainment and fun, and really had one of the great debuts in WWE in '99. I mean, you go back and watch it, and I still get like goosebumps watching it, because it was just such a visceral reaction when the lights came up and you see his name on the screen and you see him standing there. The crowd, like, I've never seen a crowd, maybe when CM Punk debuted in AEW, never seen a crowd all like united and standing up and just blowing the roof off the place. I mean,
well, because it was also the first internet debut. Like, this is when the internet finally kind of had hold, and there was enough wrestling fans who were reading, because before, I mean, they used to have like wrestling newsletters, the dirt sheets, people, some fans knew, but that was a real small subset. Once you hit like 99, the internet is so much more prevalent. So many more people knew that this was kind of coming, or at least knew who he was, that it wasn't like just someone showed up. As
well as he was one of, not the first, X-Pac I think was the first, but he was really the first, I think in the fans' eyes, like homegrown WCW talent that jumped ship.
Yeah, but I mean, let's face it. X-Pac, there's a reason there's a thing called X-Pac heat.
I know.
Let's just forget about X-Pac and focus on Chris Jericho.
Right, but my point is, in '98, the story leading up to that point was mostly WWE talent jumping over to WCW and joining the NWO. Jericho was one of the first. I don't know if he was the first, but he was one of the early guys who came over, and it was like a big signing, and was treated like, really the big star that he had built himself up to be. But a lot of that was due to him and the stuff he was doing in WCW to establish himself that way. And so,
totally. I mean, they gave him the royal treatment. I mean, it was a whole
with the Rock.
Whole thing. It was it was at least a month, if not 2 months, of like segments leading up, like this countdown, and like teasing it, and then to put him right into a program with the Rock when he comes out.
Yeah, I
mean, that's huge. That is, I mean, gargantuan. Just, and that kind of puts him over the edge for some other folks, because it is that sort of like, and Jericho makes this list, like how?
Yeah,
but
So with all that being said, I'm going to go with Bret Hart on this one, even though Jericho, certainly had an impact and really kind of, through, I don't want to say it was all him. I mean, clearly there was a machine behind him, but he did a lot of the legwork in spite of a lot of things going on at WCW to get himself over and to get himself noticed, and really had that great debut in WWE and his start there. But Bret Hart, just longevity wise throughout the 90s, and just with his reigns as world champion, just, I think, just shines a bigger light on things versus Jericho. We'll hear from Jericho again in the 2000s, and I think it'll be a different discussion at that point.
Yes, I agree. Hitman all the way on this one.
All right. We're getting down to our last two first round brackets here, so we'll try to get through this. Scott Hall / Razor Ramon versus The Rock. So for Scott Hall, let me pull his dossier up here. And by dossier, I mean Wikipedia page. Let's see. So he starts out in WCW for a year, goes to WWE in '92 as Razor. Really, what I remember standing out with him was really, kind of helped continue that tradition of the Intercontinental Championship being the workman's title. As much of a cartoon character as he might have seen as Razor Ramon, he really had great matches with the folks that he wrestled against, and so he just established himself as a great worker, as well as having that great finisher move, the Razor's Edge, which at the time was seen as kind of an innovative move. We'd never seen a move like that in the 80s. A lot of those moves were leg drops or body slams or suplexes or flying off the top. And here you have a guy where he, puts someone up, like almost in this like crucifix position, and then drops them down on the back of their head. And it looked pretty vicious for the time. So,
oh, totally.
So yeah, so he had a great run that way with the Intercontinental belt. Also, had that great match where 1-2-3 Kid debuts and pins Razor on Monday Night Raw. So one of those, kind of an early, calling to what we would see in the Monday Night Wars, where, hey, you better tune in because it's not just going to be jobber matches, that sort of thing. It was kind of cool to see that, and he was one of the guys that was, part of it. So,
and the ladder match.
Yeah, and thank you. WrestleMania 10, he and Shawn Michaels having, the iconic ladder match that established that, as well as I think the match that he had later on was it with Michaels or with Nash? Yeah, I think it was Michaels again. He had another one, I think, in SummerSlam. But and then with Goldust as well, and I'm trying to think who else. So yeah, so Scott Hall really strong Intercontinental Champion through much of the 90s. Then goes to WCW with Nash, again one of the founding members of the NWO. But
he's
really
actually the first one. He's the first one to debut. He's the first one to show up on WCW TV.
Yes, he is. Yep.
So I mean that's a little bit notable too, because I mean, it's kind of funny. You think about it. My natural inclination would have been for Nash, but you think about it, it's like, oh no, of course it has to be Scott Hall, because I mean, look at him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just, I mean, Nash is like, he's a big guy, but I mean, you see Hall and you're like, it's just, there's something about him that just his presence says more than he would ever have to say on a microphone.
Yeah, he's got the cool factor going for him.
Oh yeah, totally. He has that. It's the same thing I look at like Rhea Ripley right now. Like she has that charisma that goes beyond. Like she's figured out something, that the same sort of thing that he figured out. Like she's managed. They had that thing where they're like, I don't have to say or do anything. Just my presence is like polarizing and cool, and just it just speaks for itself. And that's not the case for everybody.
Yeah. Yep.
Anyways, just want to throw that in. Didn't mean to interrupt, sir. Go ahead.
No, right on. I mean, you're right. And when he goes to when New World Order gets established and they start running with that, he's still one of those core foundational members of it, but he never really ascends to world championship status or the main event. I mean, he is in the main event, but it's always in a tag with Nash or with Nash and Hogan or something to that effect. Really what he ends up winning is really around the tag titles. And then just, it finds himself in different, feuds, over his time there. Overall. So impactful, but somewhat limited in a way. And then we get to The Rock, who really debuts in, let me jump over to, really debuts in 96. And gets kind of pushed into the Intercontinental Championship, and everyone hates him.
Rocky, die.
Die, Rocky, die. You saw those
Rocky
signs
sucks.
everywhere.
Like, oh my gosh.
It's like, how dare you push this man to the moon? But yeah, becomes part of the Nation of Domination. A lot of his time is spent around the Intercontinental Championship. But as he begins establishing, what we know as the Rock character, he starts to heat up a lot. Great promo, and ultimately wins the WWE Championship in '98, where who did he defeat? Was it Mankind? I believe it was Mankind.
I believe so, yeah.
And then he and Mankind feud over the World Championship. I believe the '99 Rumble is the one where they did the goofy thing where they recorded Foley saying "I quit" when he didn't really say it, but Rock,
the I Quit match. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, but that's the one where I think Rock like hauled off with like 11 chair shots on Foley.
Oh, I think it was more than that. I think it was like there was at one point like 11 in a row.
Yeah.
It was an unprotected, because Foley's hands were cuffed behind his back. So it's just like straight chair on skull.
Yeah, there's no protection going on there at all. So the 90s for The Rock, are really just, 96 to 2000. But what a 4-year span. I mean, goes from being a nobody and someone who the fans hated to someone who, the fans are loving to cheer and kind of get in on his shtick and you have him kind of stopping in the middle of a shtick saying, the Rock doesn't perform, or how would he say it? He would go into doing one of his catchphrases, and he would say, this isn't sing along with the Rock, or whatever he would say.
Oh, he was so good. That was the thing. Like, people loved to cheer him once he got into that point, but they also loved to hate him. But he's another one of those guys that, sort of like Roman Reigns now. Yeah. Like, when he comes out, like, people react to him. They cheer just because they're like, it's here is the big event. Here is the big thing that we've been waiting for. And people do that with The Rock. And then once he starts his shtick, then they're like, okay, now we're going to boo accordingly. But he just got a visceral reaction that people couldn't help themselves. Mm-hmm. And, one of those times when it's like, yeah, the nickname fits. He is like probably the most electrifying man in sports entertainment, just because it's an instantaneous reaction.
Yep. So, I actually changed up my initial pick. I'm actually going with The Rock.
So who did you end up picking?
I'm going with The Rock.
It doesn't matter. I'm sorry.
Oh, see, I snuck it in before you could.
I know your timing is just too quick for me. You're like a cat. You just pounce left and right.
Well, I do try. But I originally had picked Scott Hall just on the significance of NWO. But as I was kind of thinking, as we were talking through this and stuff, it is pretty remarkable in the 4 years with The Rock, what he accomplished. And, quite honestly, the argument could be made. I mean, my initial reason for picking Hall was the decade-long run that he had. Like he had a lot of success in the early 90s as an Intercontinental Champion, had a lot of success in the mid and end of the decade with NWO. But I don't know that the early part of the decade matches what he did the latter part of the decade. Like, once the NWO is established, he doesn't really do a whole lot. He's there and he's still a presence, but he's not a defining presence. You know what I mean? And that's the thing I think that maybe separates him a little bit from Nash, is that, at least Nash went on to be a world champion, main evented, helped push the business forward, through his work and that sort of thing. Hall did as well, but it was just, I don't know. It seems like it was a little bit different. Plus, I think that's when the substance abuse issues were kind of kicking in for him and stuff. And that took its toll on his career as well. So I'm going to go with The Rock actually on this one.
Yeah. It's sort of that argument of like, okay, well, Jimi Hendrix only had, when you look at it, like a 3-year, I think it's a 3 or 4 year career of recording, performing live and all that. And do you take that over someone like Eric Clapton or another established guitar player who you look at and they're like, well, their peak was like 10 or 15 years. And it's like, yeah, that's great. But what a freaking 4 years. What an amazing 2 or 3 years that was. Like, that's like 60 normal years. Like, it's just so sped up and packed in. Mm-hmm. Like, it's the same with The Rock. Like that rags to riches, from hatred to beloved, heel or babyface character. What a fracking ride that was.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing. And also became one of the biggest draws in the business at that time. That's not even taking into account what would go on in the next decade. And to the point now where it's like he could come out of retirement now and he's one of the biggest stars immediately. Mm-hmm. So it's like, just in that 4 years is remarkable. So yeah, I got to go with The Rock as well.
Nice. All right. Our last first round matchup, two icons
thank God.
Of the 90s.
Yes.
Sting against good old Mick Foley. Mrs.
Mama Foley's
baby boy.
Yeah, it was Mrs. Foley's baby boy. That's right. I don't know why I said mama. Sorry, Mrs. Foley.
Oh, all right. Well, let's start with Sting. Another stalwart of the 90s. His career started in the late 80s. So when we get to the early 90s, he has risen to main event status, becomes heavyweight champion a few times, has some great, feuds with the Four Horsemen, with Flair, specifically.
Was he part of the Four Horsemen at one point?
Yes, he was. He
Again,
was part
like
of the
everyone
Four
was part of the Horsemen.
And actually, for those who are interested in checking it out, I think it's still up on YouTube. But there's someone had a great recording of when Sting was kicked out of the Horsemen, and it's actually pretty funny because imagine this: he's part of this group, but he's also earned this right to challenge Flair for the championship, and Flair's the champion at the time. So he's in this group. Flair's the champ. And this interview that Terry, of all people, Terry Funk, which is really funny, conducts.
Well, Sting, what are you gonna do now?
Right, is basically like happening before this main event where Sting is going to challenge for Flair, and the Horsemen come out. And they're basically telling me, you better not do this. And he's like, no, I've earned this right. I'm going to do this. And it's really funny because Ole Anderson gets on the mic, and Ole's interesting. I'll just say that Ole is interesting. But man, it was a vicious beatdown of Sting. I don't know if he wins the title later that night or not, but anyways, if you find that on YouTube, watch it. It's a little bit of 90s, nostalgia, and you're just kind of like, wow, these guys are not great at times with I mean, Flair was great on the promo, but Ole was just like, Ole and Funk were really funny. Anyways,
well,
so
don't forget about his incredibly impactful team up with RoboCop. Don't forget that.
Thank you. Capital Combat 1990, Great American Bash.
Oh.
RoboCop comes in and saves the day. Literally in Wikipedia, it says Sting was rescued by his buddy RoboCop. It says this.
His buddy.
Yeah.
And RoboCop was falling apart as he went down.
Yeah,
as he's like walking out of the arena, like this plastic flapping off of one of his legs.
Hopefully it wasn't Peter Weller. I think Peter Weller has too much respect for that. So
no. I think Peter Weller was long gone at that point.
Yeah. Rick Rude was another great feud that he had as well. So yeah, Sting had a really strong early 90s into the mid 90s. He was the franchise of WCW through the 90s. If Flair was that foundational cornerstone piece, Sting was right there with him. When it came to the New World Order, he had to radically change his gimmick. Really did this really what I would consider risky in some ways approach to his character, where I mean he really didn't compete for close to a year, because he was playing this new Crow character where he was kind of watching from above and kind of being the retribution that was going to be coming to the NWO at some point. But he was positioned as that single savior next to like DDP and like Lex Luger, who were going after the NWO to defend WCW, and again would have been a great world title victory and way to kind of climax the story. But they went ahead and decided, Hogan decided to be a goof about dropping the world title, and it turned into a mess that later came to define WCW as a business. So
who would have thunk it?
What's that?
I said, who would have thunk it?
Later, he joins the NWO Wolfpack after all of that kind of blows over. But yeah, Sting is really had a great decade, throughout his time in WCW. And then we get to Mrs. Foley's baby boy and good old Mick, Cactus Jack in WCW in the early 90s, having, some great feuds with like Abdullah the Butcher. But really the one I want to call out is the one with Vader, because that one is where Vader did this. First of all, was involved in, I think, the incident where Foley's ear gets ripped off in Germany, through that match. But then also notable in America was he power bombed Foley onto the concrete floor, which I wouldn't say was the exact same thing as Jake Roberts DDTing Ricky Steamboat, but I got to imagine it's a pretty close second, because the concrete has no give to it. So I don't know how you protect someone in that situation. So
yeah. I mean, and the funny part is, like in his autobiography, Mick does actually give Leon some credit, Vader, basically saying like he took pretty good care of me. Like he released him low, like did as much as he could to lessen the impact while still making it look good. And for someone like Vader to take a little bit off the fastball, there's a little bit of respect there. So that's nice. He was trying to make sure he didn't kill him, I guess. That's nice.
And that is a really good point. When he did that power bomb, it wasn't uncharacteristically like Vader is hunched over a lot. Like he spins him into the power bomb position, but when he drops him, it isn't like it isn't like a last ride power bomb like what the Undertaker does. It is he like you could tell he was protecting him or as much as he could, given them given
as much as you can against the concrete. Yeah,
exactly. So Foley spends some time there. He does a tour of duty in ECW as well as some independents. of course in ECW, the big thing there is when he, kind of does this run as, Cactus Jack as the anti-hardcore wrestler, basically kind of turning things on their head and chastising the fans for being bloodthirsty and wanting violence and that sort of thing. And so it was starting to show Foley as this, guy who could play a few dimensions in his character and stuff, and really was interesting. And then he gets to WWE as Mankind, basically, just taking that kind of violent and just, crazy nature that is Cactus Jack and just channeling it in a very focused way. And really as not so much a comical character, but Mankind, when he talks as Mankind, there is a bit of, I don't want to call it comedy. It was entertaining. It was entertaining to watch him do his promos and be this like just crazy guy. And he had great matches with Triple H, with obviously with Undertaker, Shawn Michaels. He credits that In Your House Mind Games as one of the best matches he's had, when that was with Shawn Michaels. And then he has, a great feud with the Undertaker with there's the Buried Alive match. What's that?
Boiler Room Brawl, Buried Alive. Yep. Hell in a Cell. I mean, yeah.
Boiler Room Brawl, Buried Alive, and then Hell in a Cell. And we already talked about that iconic match. So, but the biggest thing is really, in the late 90s, how he ascends, when he starts to play, not just Mankind, but then transitions to Cactus Jack, transitions to Dude Love, the way he connects with the audience, and then WWE gets behind him and ends up, awarding him with the world championship, which no one ever thought. I think he was like in 96, no one was going to point to him and say, oh yeah, there's a future world champion. But the connection he had with the crowd and the way that he just kind of built, himself up as Mick Foley and as these other characters, just the timing was just right. And it was a great moment. And it was a moment that really blew up in the face of the WCW folks that thought it would be funny to, say, oh, Mick Foley's going to win the title. It sucks. And then everyone flipped the channel and watched. So yeah, Foley has an amazing run, through the 90s, and really is just in a lot of ways like DDP is just that feel good story of a guy who really worked his tail off and really just connected with the crowd and saw great success.
And that's leaving out the Japanese death matches.
I had to skip over some things. So yes,
which I mean, we don't need to get into that because it's kind of just like what you think it sounds like.
Yeah. I just love the story he wrote in his book about how he would get on the plane still sweaty, and like I can't even imagine that. Like I feel crap coming out of a gym, after a workout, and I can't imagine fighting in a match where I'm bloodied, I have like blood pasted to me, and I go on a plane. Like that just sounds so weird.
And he's singed. Like he has his skin is gray and flaking off. Like a shower and a long sleeve shirt. I'm just saying,
I'm just saying the person who paid for the seat next to him got to be happy about that. So,
oh yeah, I distinctly asked for a non-smoking seat.
Yes.
That means the person as well, not just what they're smoking, but like the individual shouldn't be smoking and smoldering.
Indeed. So my pick for this matchup between Sting and Foley, Sting strong decade, Foley strong decade. It is a tough choice because they both, an argument could be made for both moving forward. But I'm going to actually go with Mick Foley on this one. I feel like his career and the way he really kind of, I don't want to say transformed the wrestling business, but had a lot of moments where he really had or created memorable moments that people are going to remember for a really long time. I just think that supersedes the body of work that Sting had.
And I will go there. Mick Foley did transform professional wrestling, in my opinion. Sting, great babyface, strong character. Absolutely nothing wrong with who he was as a character, as a wrestler, whatever. Like nothing wrong with that. Mick Foley is, to me, is going back to that Hendrix analogy. He was revolutionary, and not only did he do solid work in WCW while getting ignored. And one of the and it's funny you say in 1996, no one would have pointed to him as like the world champion. Like according to Mick Foley, Ric Flair, when he was the booker, they were talking about pushing Mick Foley, and he was like, "Can you ever see him wrestling for the world's heavyweight championship?" And that's the end of the discussion of elevating him any further, not to put him in the main event, but even just pushing him up the card a little bit, just stomped it.
Yeah,
and the fact that he did good work there, but then in ECW, he was really one of the people who got that company over to the point where it could continue, and you have, guys like Taz and Sabu, that you have these characters could then grow that, and how influential ECW was.
Yeah.
ECW, I don't know if they would have gotten as far in the way that they did without Mick Foley there.
Yeah.
To really put his body, physicality on the line to make this thing happen. And then in WWE, hey, I'm a sucker for a good story, man. Like, you tell me somebody is that person was never picked, first for gym class and all that, like that was me.
Yep.
So you tell me that like that guy finally gets over and kind of in spite of everything becomes the champ, that the company looks at him and goes, "Yep, we're going to give it to that guy." I'm all in.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's just him by a mile for me.
Nice. All right. I believe at this point we have overviewed 20 some odd wrestlers, and so now we're in the quarterfinal round. So let's try to elevate pitch this one.
Hour 7 at this point, isn't
Hour
it?
7.
Yeah.
of this voyage that we're
otherwise
on.
known as the cure for insomnia. I really hope that people are into some deep REM sleep right now. They'll remember everything when they wake up. Though,
Indeed.
so it's all good.
Indeed. All right. So for me in the quarterfinals, my first bracket is Kevin Nash versus DDP. And you, sir, I believe you have Triple H versus China?
Well, wait a minute here. Yes. Okay. I'm looking at yes. So Triple H versus China, which is interesting because we have Bodyguard versus the feature, and
yes,
boyfriend and ex-girlfriend versus each other, which is all uncomfortable all the way around.
So yes. So for my matchup with Kevin Nash versus DDP, I'm actually going to advance Kevin Nash as much as I appreciate DDP's body of work. The fact that Nash really had the longevity across the decade, with his title runs and with his impact on the respective companies he worked for. I just think that stands head and shoulders above what DDP did. So I'm going to advance Mr. Nash. How about you, sir?
Well, this is where the Cinderella run for China ends. As impactful as she was, man, it's
come
just
on, you misogynistic son.
Yeah, see, it's easy to go there, isn't it?
Sure,
just to get a laugh. Yeah, sure. But Triple H, just has the better credentials, and it again, like when it comes push to shove, like China was revolutionary, but Triple H, was one of the shoulders on which the company was carried forward, and had a huge outsized impact on the Attitude Era. So I'm going to give it to Triple H in this matchup.
Understood. All right. My next bracket is The Undertaker versus Stone Cold Steve Austin,
which is a match that happened about 8,000 times.
Indeed,
during the Attitude Era.
They were opponents quite often, and had some fantastic matches. This one's tough because The Undertaker had quite a run.
I don't think there's a wrong answer here. It just comes down to what your preference is.
Yeah. But I think in some ways I'm going to go against the logic I've used before. If we look at body of work, The Undertaker probably has the larger body of work across the decade. But Steve Austin, his ascension to, where he landed at the end of the decade as the face of wrestling and his, just the icon that he became, I got to give him the nod, moving forward. Undertaker, I love the character. Definitely influential, definitely has his place in history, but when it comes to 90s wrestling, he's in the conversation, but Stone Cold's usually the first name out of people's mouths. So I'm going to go with Stone Cold on this one.
And just to know, the man they call Tim did have the Stone Cold hands up. Nothing wrong with him, not trying to knock his work or nothing.
I know. I'm
not for nothing.
I'm not trying to be snug.
You know what? I'm going to agree with you. you can make a compelling argument for either one of these, and longevity versus, the skyrocket, and just I don't. In this case, I got to go with Stone Cold. You know, I mean, like I said before, he's who I think of when I think of 90s wrestling.
Yep. 100%. All right, my next bracket is Shawn Michaels versus Bret the Hitman Hart. I think you have the same one. Is that correct?
Same here.
All right.
Which, I mean, this is another matchup that's like, ooh, yeah.
Well, you can call this the Chi-Town screw job because I'm going to have Bret Hart go over Shawn Michaels.
Oh,
That's
wow.
Right. That's
All right.
Yeah, no,
All
I mean, this is, I mean, we're getting into the nitty gritty, and these are hard choices to make because both, an argument could be made for either one. Like you said, there is no wrong answer here. Both of these guys had exemplary decades. Both of them throughout the decade carried WWE on their shoulders. And so, really it just comes down to, preference, honestly. I mean, and Bret Hart, I was a solid Bret Hart fan throughout that decade. I loved his work. I loved what he did in the ring. I loved what Michaels did too, but Bret Hart was, the excellence of execution. He was the guy that just made wrestling look real and really just had great matches with everyone that he wrestled with. Including Michaels himself with that, Iron Man match. So I'm going to go with Bret Hart on this one, move him forward.
Man, I had Michaels. I'll be real honest with you, but you just completely turned me around on this. I'm going with Bret Hart as well.
Wow.
For the
I rarely
additional
convince you.
for the additional reason that really in a historical sense, and this is kind of where because you didn't even mention this, but it made me think further on this. Mm-hmm. In a historical sense, Bret Hart is one of the reasons we get the Attitude Era. He really is, because if once Vince didn't have Hart, he really had to start thinking outside the box, because that really was one of his few like aces that he had. Mm-hmm. And once that's gone, it's like, okay, well now I give the title to Michaels. Yeah. But now what? Right. Now all of a sudden, now I don't have that feud is gone. I need a whole bunch of new characters, and I need to change the way I'm doing things, because I'm getting my butt kicked, and now I'm handing my best player over to my competition. Yeah. So I could, and thankfully for, however you want to look at it, and Vince, at least for Vince's sake, thankfully, Bret, WCW couldn't manage their way out of a wet paper bag, because they paid Bret Hart a butt ton of money, had an established star, had a great storyline just ready, and they did with him. And that was another thing that managed to like help the Attitude Era, is that they just squandered Bret Hart just completely, which is amazing that they did that. So I'm going to go with that, kind of the history taking it over the top, but for all the reasons that you just said as well to start with. Yeah.
Excellent. All right. Last quarterfinal matchup, The Rock and Mick Foley. We've gone through the credentials.
Another frequent matchup. Like these two were always on this, and then also ended up as partners, which is another thing.
Connection, baby. The Rock and Sock Connection. Just another tough one, but I think this time I'm going to, once again use the longevity argument to some degree, because I think you made a solid argument on, Foley really transforming wrestling, with what he did. So I'm going to go with Mick Foley on this one. I think when we have this conversation in the 2000s, I think, the Rock is probably the stronger pick there, because of the achievements that he has, and kind of the early to mid part of that decade. But both decorated individuals, both having, an outsized impact on it. But I got to give the nod to Foley. I think his contributions are greater at that point.
Again, this is one where I man, now you got me rethinking this one too. You're sullying my bracket with your logic and your impassioned pleas.
Logic. You're making me
because I had The Rock.
Yeah,
I had The Rock in this because just on sheer reaction. Mm-hmm. But then when I'm thinking more about it, Foley also he had some periods. There was a period at the kind of the beginning of the Attitude Era where he wasn't kind of the guy left behind.
Yeah.
But really, once he got rolling and comfortable in that again, he was he was getting that same sort of reaction that was just so over the top and outsized for who he was. Dang it, you turned me around again on another one. I'm going with Mick Foley.
Oh my
gosh.
gosh.
I'm going with my heart on this. I'm going with my heart.
This, ladies and gentlemen, this is unheard of. This is
I don't feel comfortable with it either. I don't like it. I don't like it when we agree. It makes me feel, I get itchy.
You get itchy.
All right. I need dissension and
might be something
friction.
else. But anyways.
Well, yeah.
Dissension and
I made the mistake of sitting on the bench at the gym today, so I'm not sure.
Well, there's your problem. All right, getting into the semifinals, we have, for me at least, I have Kevin Nash versus Stone Cold Steve Austin.
I've got Triple H versus Stone Cold.
All right. I am going to end up going for all the arguments we've made, comparing the two of them together. Nash has certainly his impact and his place, but Stone Cold is the face of the 90s. I'm going to advance him into the finals. So thank you, Mr. Nash, but Stone Cold, give him the stunner and a hell yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. Same thing here. And Stone Cold is so iconic that it's really hard for anyone to get over on him.
Yep. And then on my other semifinal bracket is a very strange matchup. I think this is a dream match that never happened. Bret Hart versus Mick Foley. And we've talked about Foley's impact. We talked about what Hart did during his time. The 90s are really Bret Hart's time to shine and to be that champion. Foley again, transforming wrestling with what he did. But I got to give the nod to Bret Hart on this one. I think, just when I put the two of them together, I feel Bret Hart has the stronger case in this particular situation. So I'm going to go with Bret Hart.
Well, now that you've completely hosed over my bracket, I had to change what this matchup was because I had Bret Hart versus The Rock originally, and I had The Rock going over Bret Hart. And now, ladies and gentlemen, there's a new Cinderella in town.
Oh, here we go.
Mick Foley, ladies and gentlemen, over Bret Hart.
Advance him to the finals, huh?
Yes, I am, because damn it, if I love a story that much, let's keep this sucker going.
All right. So now in my final bracket, I have Stone Cold versus Bret Hart, a rematch from WrestleMania 13, where Bret Hart went over in the submission match. And really for all the reasons we've stated before, with Stone Cold, Bret Hart has the longevity, no doubt, has the credentials, the accolades that go with what he did for WWE. But Stone Cold was that face of the second golden era, and he was the Hogan of that era, and had just an amazing run that transcended what wrestling was at the time. So for me, in my finals pick for the 1990s wrestling bracket, I have Jake the Snake in the 1980s bracket, but for 1990s, I'm going to go with the man he faced in the King of the Ring, Stone Cold Steve Austin.
A very good pick. For me, I've got Stone Cold versus Mick Foley. I have no idea when their pivotal match would be. I know they faced each other again approximately 500 times.
Yes, they did. Frequent foes.
Yes. This one's tough because I could make a similar argument for the longevity of Mick Foley, similar to how you made an argument for Bret Hart. But once again, Stone Cold, iconic.
Yep.
Absolutely iconic.
He is the 90s.
That's just the way it is. That's the bottom line. Stone Cold wins the 90s.
There we go. I was a little snug there. Little snug
there. I'm not trying to say,
Oh, it's funny. That is funny.
Not just a character in wrestling, but what a character just in real life.
Yes.
It seems.
Yes. Yes.
I just love the fact that the stories that you hear about him, Jericho calling him up about being on the podcast, and and he's having a couple beers in bed watching it, watching wrestling, and Jericho's sitting there in bed having a couple of cocktails, and his, or even the Paul Heyman story where he talks about when he wanted to bring Stone Cold into ECW. He's like, hey, Steve, what are you doing? Sitting at home having a couple beers. Hey, you wanna come to Philadelphia? Well, damn, son, yeah, sure I would.
That is funny.
Oh my gosh, this is great.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, so Stone Cold wins the 90s in a rout for both of us. This is I mean, I kind of saw that one coming. I gotta be honest.
A little bit.
And another thing.
All right, sir. What do you got for and another thing now that we've entered hour 8?
All right. My and another thing is a book that I started reading over my vacation called Blood, Sweat, and Pixels by Jason Schreier. It is a book. On the book cover, it says the triumphant, turbulent stories behind how video games are made. And this is a book. I just happened upon it after I was reading another book for work, and it came up as, because it's computer related. Or actually, I think it may have been when I was reading Ready Player One, but just came up as a something you might like sort of thing. It's really interesting. It's basically 10 chapters talking about 10 different games, how they were made, the companies that made them, and each chapter has kind of a different facet of the process or different challenge or thing that was overcome as part of that process. So just really interesting stories. For the first chapter on Pillars of Eternity, that was done by a company called Obsidian, and it was really the first one that leveraged Kickstarter as a means of raising funds. Typically, video game studios have to rely on, maybe Microsoft or some of the console providers to, fund some of the games that they're doing, especially when they're building like foundational titles and that sort of thing. And in this case, they after going through a pretty crushing layoff because of Microsoft kind of pulling, support, they one of the guys started a Kickstarter with a very clear kind of business plan and purpose, and they ended up raising $4 million from just the video gaming community that really wanted this particular game that they were putting out there, and so it's about the process and really. The thing I kind of take away from all of these chapters is, to go in, I'd have a lot of respect for people who work on video games and also have, find a way to maintain a family, because there's a real time commitment that comes with it. And it's one of those things that is very, very difficult, I think, for people to find that work-life balance. And because of the crushing nature of the schedule and delivering something that, when you think about playing a video game, right, you want to play something that doesn't have a lot of issues and a lot of problems with it. And so they have to spend a lot of time getting it right. And what's really interesting too, is they kind of play in this area of tech where it's a nexus point of doing technical work, but also doing art, and trying to find the balance between the two of those, so that you can predict when you can finish the work and do it on time and that sort of thing. And it's hard because as the author describes from his interviews, one of the things they try to evaluate as they go through the process is this game going to be fun? Are some of the mechanics that we've come up with going to be entertaining for people to want to play this game? So just really interesting stories. Stardew Valley is one that my sons play. And there's a really interesting story there. This one guy basically spending 5 years writing it and doing all of the work around it, as opposed to, what goes into a video game typically from a company. So if you're interested in video games and how they're made and the stories behind, the companies that produce them, this is a really fun book to read. Jason Schreier does a great job writing about, these interviews and the stories behind these companies and the people involved of, producing these games that I think a lot of times we take for granted as being these really solid, polished pieces of software. And, there's a lot of work that goes into them. So do check it out. Blood, Sweat, and Pixels.
Very nice. As for myself, I ventured out to the theater and I saw myself a little John Wick Chapter 4. And man, I'm already kind of well established in the bag for the John Wick movies. I think as far as action movies, as far as revenge flicks, there are very few revenge movies that do it better. There are very few action movies that do this better. They're just done so well, so crisply, and also very economical storytelling. Like I'm constantly in awe of just how they give you more information on these characters without having to sit there and dump a whole bunch of exposition in your lap. So John Wick Chapter 4, a really fun ride. I will, however, say I do agree with something that I saw Mark Bernardin, a close personal friend of the show, Mark Bernardin, who posted that he actually felt that, without spoilers, that a few less action scenes, a few less action beats would have probably made the others feel that much more special and tightened up the movie. Because the movie it's 2 hours, 40 minutes. It's a long flick. And I would agree with that. I think that not taking out all the action, because of course it's an action flick and it's very visceral and it moves and it doesn't feel like it bogs down so much as it just sort of plateaus in areas. Cutting back a few of those action scenes, I think, would have probably helped make it a little bit punchier. No, pun intended there, walked right into it. But it's overall still a really good story, really, really fun flick. I know there was one point where I'm like, all right, we're an hour and a half into this and I really got to go use the men's room, and found kind of a part where I'm like, all right, we're in a car chase. I know I'm going to own this movie someday, so I have no fear of missing something in this car chase. And, he just got in the car. So I know we're good for about 10 minutes of action in the car, so I can hightail it and go. Then I also, of course, took advantage of that to go get some, Sour Patch Kids, because I'm a glutton for punishment. But, again, so really good, but I do feel a little bit more judicious editing and a little more compacting of those action scenes would have helped. But hey, I'll take it as it is. A really good flick. It's one of the few action franchises that I feel keeps its teeth in every movie. Like, I don't feel like there's been a weak one yet where it's like, oh yeah, they just kind of mailed this in. No, they all go way harder than they have any reason to. So definitely go check out John Wick Chapter 4. It is a fun movie to see on the big screen. But if not, then just rent the snot out of this later on and you'll love it.
Very nice. Very nice.
All right, folks. Well, thank you for bearing with us, those of you who have borne with us. We certainly appreciate it. All the members of the Free Range Idiocy congregation out there, wake up! We're coming to the end of the show. Time to turn things off. So thank you all for tuning in. If you are not a member of the Free Range Idiocy congregation, you can join just by subscribing. You can find us at freerangeidiocy.com. That's where you'll find all of our episodes. You can download them individually. You can also subscribe using the Podbean app. If you're of a mind that you already have enough apps in your life and that you don't want another one, you can also find us on Google Podcasts. We are on Apple Podcasts. We are on Spotify. We are on Pandora. We're on a whole bunch of others. Go ahead and search for Free Range Idiocy. You'll find us. If you would like to find us on the social medias, we are on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we are on the YouTubes, where you can also subscribe and get our full episodes there if you like to get your podcasts and media content through the YouTubes. We were on Twitter, but F the mollusk, so we're not on Twitter anymore. And so if you have any questions, thoughts, concerns, suggestions for a show, like our friend out there who sent us they sent us a message to Facebook, so you can also do that. But you can send us an email, an electronic message through to tim@freerangeidiocy.com, and he will get back to those as soon as possible. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for me to wrap this thing up here and hand this over to the less idiotic of the two idiots who run this show. And by that, I mean the man they call Tim. Definitely not Patrick. He's been sleeping once again in his closet. I'm broadcasting here from the office, and I didn't know this was possible, but it actually, the smell gets worse in here at night. I don't know what causes that, but I'm a little concerned.
Oh, gosh.
But anyways, that would be the man they call Tim, but not before I ask him the second most important question to ever be uttered by human lips. The first, of course, being, what is hip? The second being, what the hell do we learn this episode?
We've learned the following, my friend. We've learned that Mandalorian Season 3 is hitting all the notes, is scratching all the itches, and giving us a little bit of a little BSG nod every now and then, which we appreciate.
Yes.
Although I am wishing that Favreau and Filoni had that Raptor Assault line worked in there somewhere, because that just would have been perfect. That just would have been perfect. We have also learned that as much as the man they call Tim is a wrestling Sherpa of sorts, Uncle Todd breaking out a few informational nuggets here and there, Owen Hart style. So we do appreciate that.
I am not a nugget.
No, sir, you are not. And we have also learned that as we looked at the 90s in wrestling, just to take a moment and just take it all in and recognize the breadth of talent. I mean, really, the 90s was just such a period of flourishing of the business, of different talent, of, as we talked about, some folks who on the surface probably wouldn't have amounted much, but ended up, being transformational in their own way. And so we have seen, learned, held, seen, felt, smelt, and dealt through the discussion here on this front. And we do thank you once again for your listenership. We thank you for, sticking with us for the 3-hour odyssey that is the 1990s wrestling.
Has it only been 3 hours? I would have sworn this was 10. I feel like I'm aging in dog years. I was clean shaven when this started. I've got like a Chuck Norris beard going right now.
Got the Homer Simpson beard going there. So with all that being said, thank you all again, and we do now bid you adieu as we close up shop for this episode. And as we like to close things out, be safe, be healthy, be kind, be good to one another. And, well, it's just good common sense. If you're going to leave the room, hit the lights on the way out.
It's like I picked the wrong week. Quit drinking.
I beg your pardon, what did you say?
I think you've had about enough.
Well, I think you're wrong, you increasingly attractive-looking woman. You're really pretty.
Oh, stop.
No, I'm serious. You could be in magazines. You could. And not just like Jugs or Creamsicle.
Damn!
You're such a disappointing pair. I prayed so hard for you.
Call me? She won't call.
Oh, here's a pleasant sight. Cirrhosis the Wonder Dog.
I'm not drunk, all right? I just have a speech impediment. And a stomach virus. And an inner ear infection.
Get out. And don't come back until you've redeemed yourselves.
So say we all. So say we all.
Hello, what have we here?
I mean, that really got out of hand fast.
I'm waiting for the next episode of The Mandalorian where the armorer gives us that great speech of, there is a line running down this deck. Somewhere Eddie Olmos is like, son of a bitch!
That's my line.
You hear Bo-Katan like, somehow this seems familiar.
This seems like I've been here before.
Ah, yes.
This has happened before.
Has happened before.
Mm-hmm. And will happen again.
How did I miss that? Damn, you're good, sir.
Now, what we really need is one of the Mandos helmeted up, running, either running around or just off to the side and being like, no one missed the nice guys.
Can't we get James Callis in there? Can't we get him under one of the masks? All he would have to do is he could do that from home. He wouldn't actually have to be there. That would
Absolutely.
be awesome.
Absolutely.
Now, can we? You know what? Can we get a BSG reunion for Mando? Just one episode where it's like 5 random, Mandalorians and Bo-Katan, and all of a sudden you hear oh my gosh, Jamie Bamber. You hear Chief.
What do you hear, Starbuck?
And she just has that kind of the head cocked like, do I know you guys?
Yep.
No, of course not. Of course not.
Who knew we'd get our BSG fix in a small dose from The Mandalorian?
Now get the hell out of here!